Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe as it is our biggest motivation. Let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. It was Mackenzie's idea to go camping. Actually, most things we do usually start out as her ideas. Neither of us are really outdoorsy, but we both grew up in rural towns and had our fair share of hiking and fishing. So while I wasn't exactly excited about spending a few days in the woods, I wasn't totally dreading it either. School had just let out for spring break, and after a brutal semester of midterms, I was more tempted to sleep for days than to go on an adventure. Unfortunately for me, uninterrupted sleep wasn't part of Mackenzie's plans. She'd been talking about this trip for weeks, and I had dodged it every time by pretending I had other things to do. But now, with break officially here and all my excuses used up, she had everything ready for us. So it was decided we were leaving on Sunday. Even though Mackenzie dragged me out of bed before sunrise to get on the road, I couldn't help but feel good about the day. The previous day had been spent eating and napping, the most rest I'd gotten since Christmas. Maybe I needed this break. After all, we drove out of Bakersfield, her truck bathed in the warm light of the desert sunrise. We started off chatting about school and midterms before she got into the details of the camping spot she'd found in the forest of the Sierra Nevada. It wasn't a typical campsite, she explained, but a dispersed camping area, which meant we'd register with the Park Service and then camp wherever we wanted. No water, no electricity, and no luxuries. Leave it to Mackenzie to find the most extreme version camping. As the desert scenery faded into the browns and greens of the Sierra foothills, I started rifling through our supplies. I trusted Mackenzie's planning, but hearing her describe how off-grid we'd be made me double-check everything. We each had our own tents and sleeping bags, along with enough food and water for a few days. Cooking gear, first aid kits, and other essentials were divided between our packs, which were so tall they nearly loomed over my head. I started recognizing some landmarks, Deer Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon, but Mackenzie kept driving further north, and I lost track of where we were. Eventually, she turned off the road onto a rough trail that took us deeper into the mountains. The trail ended at the base of a hill, and she pulled over. "I was out here last week scouting for spots," she said as she opened the door. "If we hike around this hill, there's a little valley with a lake at the bottom. That's where we'll set up," I groaned as I hoisted my pack onto my back. "How far is the hike?" I asked, wincing at the clatter of pots banging together. I made a mental note to pack my own gear next time. Maybe half an hour or so. I tightened the hip strap of my pack, trying to keep the weight off my shoulders. A bit of cardio never hurt anyone. I guess Mackenzie led the way around the hill, and the ground suddenly sloped downward into a small valley with a lake nestled at the bottom. It almost looked like a caldera, though I doubted there were any volcanoes in these parts. The descent was steep, and I worried about slipping and rolling down to the lake, but the dirt was firm and the trees provided good handholds. After a short while, Mackenzie stopped. I heard the sound of rushing water and peeked over her shoulder. In front of us was a stream, almost large enough to be called a small river. It fed into the lake, but the path curved, forcing us to cross the stream. The snow in the mountains must have started melting, because the stream had swelled, and the log that stretched across it was already submerged under a thin layer of water. Only a few more minutes of walking once we crossed this, Mackenzie said, tapping the log with her boot. It looked sturdy enough, despite the water. I'd be careful, I warned, leaning over to look at the water. Tiny ripples danced on the surface, but it looked deceptively calm. They say streams like these only look calm on the surface, Mackenzie snorted. That's why I don't plan on swimming in it. She started shimmying across the log, and after a moment, I followed her. It wasn't a far crossing, maybe 20 feet, but of course, it's always the little things that trip you up. Mackenzie was halfway across when her foot slipped. She leaned forward to regain her balance, but her sleeping bag, tied to the top of her pack, came loose. It tumbled over her shoulder, caught by one remaining strap, but the shift in weight was enough. She tottered for a split second, and then fell. I was right, the current was faster than it looked. Mackenzie's hand shot out to grab the log, but by the time she resurfaced, the current had already pulled her downstream. I scrambled across the log, desperate to reach the other side before she was swept too far away. Luck must have been on our side that day. The stream was fast, but thankfully not deep enough to pull Mackenzie under. About 20 yards downstream, her pack snagged on a fallen tree, and that's where I found her gasping for air, but safe. By the time we reached our campsite, she was laughing uncontrollably, maybe from adrenaline or the freezing water. She had twisted her ankle during the tumble and was limping ahead of me, while I struggled behind, carrying both her pack and mine. I don't plan on swimming in it. She giggled, mimicking herself from earlier, and then I went and fell right into the damn thing. Despite the weight of nearly 60 pounds on my back, I couldn't help but smile. I guess this trip was giving me a story to tell, after all. We finally pitched our tents and hung our soaked clothes to dry. It was around noon, and Mackenzie started digging a fire pit for lunch. Since we hadn't brought a jet boiler, I took the opportunity to admire our surroundings and was pleasantly surprised. The lake shimmered nearby, the tree line a few yards from the shore. The mountains loomed quietly around us, their silence almost eerie. After being stuck in school dorms for so long, the stillness of nature was a strange yet soothing contrast. It was as if the quietness was singing a lullaby. Mackenzie cursed beside me, snapping me out of my thoughts. She was struggling to light the fire, her hands trembling as she struck another match. A small pile of spent matches lay at her feet. "Let me give it a shot," I offered, sitting up. The adrenaline must have worn off, leaving her hands shaky from the shock. I managed to get the fire going, and the rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. As I dug through my pack, I found marshmallows and chocolate for s'mores. I threw the packaging down and said jokingly, "I see why my pack was so heavy. It was packed with these essential supplies." Mackenzie grinned, shrugging innocently before grabbing a handful of marshmallows and stuffing them into her mouth. "Aren't those for cooking?" I teased, and she shot me a comically confused look that made me burst out laughing. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, we both agreed to call it an early night so we could wake up at dawn to explore. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and checked my watch one last time before the rhythmic sound of the waves lulled me to sleep. I woke up in the dead of night, and something was wrong. My skin felt clammy, like I'd just broken a fever. The air felt heavy, suffocating, but nothing seemed out of place inside my tent. The stillness outside was unnerving. It's hard to describe, that there was no logical reason for how I felt. Deep down, I just knew something was off. We're an old species, after all. Not as ancient as the forest or mountains, but old enough. And in that time, there's something in us, something primal, that just knows when danger is near. That was the feeling clawing at me then. Suddenly, I heard a light tapping on the flap of my tent, followed by a whisper, "You need to come outside." Mackenzie's voice trembled, and she sounded terrified. I took a few deep breaths, my hand instinctively gripping the pocket knife I always carried. In one swift motion, I unzipped the tent and stuck my head out. Mackenzie stood there, her hair a mess, eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. I opened my mouth to speak, but she clamped her hand over my lips, silently pleading with me to stay quiet. For a few tense moments, we just stared at each other, our breaths shallow and frantic. Then, slowly, her gaze drifted away from mine towards the lake. Her pupils widened until I could barely see the color of her eyes. "Run," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before I could ask why, she bolted into the woods, and, without thinking, I followed. We crashed through the underbrush, her figure just barely visible ahead of me. I could only hear her breathing and the snapping of branches as we ran. "What's going on?" I shouted again, but still nothing. The adrenaline in my veins started to fade, and suddenly I stopped. It was too dark, almost unnaturally so. We had left our lanterns back at camp, and the thick canopy of trees blocked out any moonlight. We'd been running for several minutes, but there were no cuts or branches tangled in my hair. It was as if the forest had opened up for us, welcoming us deeper inside. Ahead, Mackenzie stopped, too, standing eerily still. Her breathing was no longer audible. "We have to keep going," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "Not until you tell me what's going on," I replied, my voice shaky. Mackenzie shook her head. She was standing in a shadow, so dark I couldn't make out her face. Behind her, I saw a clearing, moonlight pouring through the trees. "We're almost out of the forest," she said, and she was right. There was light ahead, but it didn't make sense. It had taken us over half an hour to hike here, and that was downhill. There was no way we'd reach the forest edge. Something wasn't right. I felt like a fish chasing a worm on a hook. Mackenzie turned around, and in an impossibly long stride, she was suddenly right in front of me. I ran. I turned and sprinted like my life depended on it. The forest, which had been welcoming on the way in, turned hostile. Branches clawed at my clothes, thorns tore at my skin, but I didn't stop. I could hear it behind me, but it didn't sound like Mackenzie anymore. Whatever it was, it sounded like it was on for legs. I didn't dare look back. My eyes stayed locked on the faint light marking the edge of the forest. I practically threw myself onto the beach, collapsing on my hands and knees. Pain shot up my wrist, but I didn't care. I crawled towards the water, gasping for breath, before finally turning to look back. There was nothing. I wasn't far from our tents, and as I lay there, I saw Mackenzie's tent unzip. She stepped out, rubbing her eyes, still half asleep. "What are you doing?" she asked grudgingly. I ran to her, nearly knocking her over as I pulled her into a hug. If she hadn't braced us, we would have both toppled over. "There's something in the forest," I gasped. Mackenzie immediately tensed, her eyes scanning the tree line. "Did you see someone?" she asked quietly. "No, ... well, yes, ... I don't know." I didn't want to tell her what I'd seen. Saying it out loud would make it all too real. "Something tried to lure me into the woods," I said after a long pause. "But it wasn't human." Mackenzie stared at me for a moment, and I half expected her to call me crazy. But she didn't. "We need to get to the truck," she said firmly, not wasting time with questions. "No," I protested, trying to regain my composure. "It wants us in the forest." "We're practically in the forest already," Mackenzie countered. "The truck's right there." "We need to go." I looked up, seeing the faint glint of her truck in the moonlight at the top of the hill. It seemed so close. I'd outrun it once. Maybe we could do it again, together this time. If we made it to the truck, We could drive until this nightmare was far behind us. We'd be in Bakersfield by morning. But no, we couldn't. The truck was over a mile away, hidden behind a hill. There was no way we could see it from here. The moment I realized that, a sickening realization washed over me. Whatever had been stalking us was clever, a predator beyond anything I could have imagined. A good hunter doesn't chase its prey with noise and chaos. It moves silently, luring you into its trap with everything you think you want. When you're lost, it becomes the way home. When you're alone, it becomes the friend you're desperate for. When you're scared, it becomes your salvation. I pushed Mackenzie away, a creeping sense of dread filling my gut. "Why didn't you wake up when I ran into the forest?" I asked, my voice shaking. She looked at me like I was speaking in tongues, her eyes narrowing. "You were quiet," she said, shrugging as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "But you heard me when I came back." My tone was accusing now, as if I was piecing together a puzzle I didn't want to finish. Mackenzie stared me dead in the eye. "I guess you were louder." Something in her voice was wrong. It didn't feel right. I stepped back, gripping the handle of my pocket knife so hard my knuckles turned white. She saw it and didn't flinch. Her voice took on a low, almost mocking tone. "So, it's gonna be like this, huh?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my ears. The silence between us stretched until it felt suffocating. After a while, Mackenzie sat down in the sand, crossing her legs like we were just two old friends camping by the lake. I sat, too, keeping my distance. She talked to me all night. At first, she pleaded with me to leave, to get out of the woods and back to safety. She begged, her voice trembling, trying to convince me that the truck was right there, that the danger was real and present. But as the night deepened, her words changed. They grew strange, alien. She asked me if I was tired. I didn't answer, but she pressed on. "You never have to be tired again," she whispered. "Not just tonight, not ever. Think about it. What are you going to do once you leave? Go back to your boring life, work until you die. You'll be tired forever. You'll die tired." Her hand swept out in a grand gesture, pointing toward the vast, ominous woods behind her. "But here," she said softly, "you can stay forever. You'll never be tired, never grow old." When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. She started talking about her sisters. Mackenzie didn't have sisters. I knew that for a fact, but now she spoke about them as if they were waiting just beyond the trees. She said they'd gather berries for me, make me crowns from oak leaves, sew clothes from the foam of the sea. It was all so vivid, so tempting. She described a life I could barely comprehend, dancing through the forest in the dead of winter, leaving footprints in the snow. She smiled, her eyes lighting up. "When you sing, the snows will melt, and you'll bring the first flowers of spring." Despite the enchantment in her words, I stayed where I was, clutching my knife, refusing to fall for whatever this thing was. I didn't sleep, I didn't move. Just before dawn, Mackenzie, if it even was Mackenzie, stood up. She brushed off her pants and looked down at me. "So that's it," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "The hunt is over." Then, with a mocking bow, she turned and walked toward the trees. "You may leave," she called back, laughing, "but don't forget to wave goodbye." Her laugh echoed through the valley, rippling across the lake and shaking the trees. I sat there, unmoving, watching as she disappeared into the darkness. I didn't trust her. I waited until the sun had risen fully before I grabbed my knife and ran for it, leaving everything behind. The forest was eerily quiet as I sprinted through it, but I didn't stop to look around. I wasn't followed. No branches snagged at me. It was like the woods were letting me go, knowing they'd almost had me. By the time I reached the truck, My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they'd give out any second. I didn't look back. I started the engine and drove out of those mountains as fast as I could, never once touching the brakes. But just before I left the foothills behind, I saw something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing in the shadows of the trees, waving. I called the nearest park services when I reached town. I told them a cleaned-up version of what had happened. They sent out a search team and found Mackenzie's body. She was face down in the lake, caught in the current, dead for hours. I don't know what I pulled out of that stream, but it wasn't her. Whatever had stalked us, it killed her, and it would have killed me too if I had stayed. The beautiful, hypnotic words it spoke meant nothing in the end. It's confined to those woods, and I will never set foot in them again. It lives in the forest. That much I know, and if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, trust your instincts, because when you see it, you'll know. It happened just yesterday, Thursday evening. It was a gloomy day, with the rain falling steadily and cars driving by as I walked along the sidewalk. I was exhausted. My head felt fuzzy, my vision blurred, and it had been a really hard day at work. I got off the bus and pulled my hood up to shield myself from the pouring rain. Then, for some reason, I looked up. I don't know why. Just instinct, I guess. That's when I saw it, a face. It appeared so quickly and vanished in the blink of an eye before I could even understand what I was seeing. I'm just tired, I told myself. No big deal. I continued walking from the bus stop to my apartment building. But something was off. It felt like every car passing by had worn out brakes. Every time one of them slowed down, I heard this high-pitched screech. I kept walking, my head down, focused on the rain. My feet were soaked. I should have worn boots. It had been about 15 minutes since I left the bus stop, and as I neared my apartment complex, the usual sounds of traffic and people talking faded away. My building is next to a park, so I pass it on my way home. The birds were surprisingly loud today. If it weren't raining, I think that high-pitched noise would have been even more obvious. Finally, I arrived home. The bulletin board at the entrance of Building A7 had some new announcements. Whoever is dumping their trash outside, please take the extra 10 minutes and walk it to the bins. And then there was another note. Apartment 203B, we know you have a dog, and pets are against the rules. But what really caught my eye was a small note stapled in the corner of the board. It read, "Please whistle back." What? A weird prank, I thought. Whatever. As I opened the front door to my apartment, I saw it again, this face, just for a split second. I froze in the doorway. Once could have been my imagination, but twice I was too tired to dwell on it. So I just stared blankly at the hallway outside for a bit before stepping inside and shutting the door behind me. That's when I heard it. A long, teasing whistle echoed from the dark hallway. Who's there? What are you doing out there? I called. Silence. I grabbed my phone and shined a flashlight into the darkness, but nothing. Of course, the light didn't reach the end of the hallway. Then I heard it again. Another whistle, this time closer. Something shifted in the shadows. Fear gripped me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and checked it at least 10 times to be sure. The whistling continued right outside the door, long and playful. Stop it. This isn't funny, and I'm tired. I shouted. I checked the time, 9 p.m. already. I swear I left work at 6. The whistling continued, now turning into a tune that seemed oddly familiar. I tried to ignore it. Last night I couldn't sleep. The whistling echoed from the hallway, the bathroom window, and even inside random rooms in my apartment. After a restless shower, I came out to find another note. It simply said, "Please whistle back." It was driving me crazy. This morning I felt like I was losing it. The whistling was nearly constant, playful and melodic, yet unbearable. I had no choice. Exhausted, my eyes bloodshot, and my hands shaking, I stood in the hallway and whistled back. Silence. Then another short whistle came in return. I did it again. Suddenly, my front door, which had been locked, slammed wide open, and the hallway light switched off. Before I could react, the door slammed shut again. I rushed over to check, and it was unlocked. I tried to lock it, but every time I checked, it was still unlocked. Now, anyone or anything can get in. Or maybe something already, as the whole day felt strange. I've had a constant headache, and every time I look in the mirror for more than a few seconds, I get dizzy. Random objects have been moved around my apartment, and I have no idea how. I keep catching glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye. That same face, like a tribal mask. I think I accidentally let something dark into my home. Even now, as I type this, I see a reflection on my monitor. It lets out another playful whistle, but this time I won't respond. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with TV. I watched it so much that my parents wouldn't even let me have one in my room. They knew, without a doubt, I'd stay up all night glued to cartoons and sci-fi reruns. But then Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. We were lucky and got out safely, but our house wasn't so fortunate. The damage was bad enough that we had to relocate to an apartment miles away from everything I knew. Friends, school, even our old neighborhood. To make the transition easier, my parents tried to cut me some slack. They set up a small 9-inch TV on my desk, a peace offering of sorts, and made me swear I'd stick to a bedtime. Well, that promise didn't last long. The little TV had a headphone jack, and after trading a Blue Eyes White Dragon card to a kid at school, I managed to score a decent pair of headphones. As long as I kept the volume low, I could watch whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. In a way, it became my comfort, my escape from the reality of losing our home and the life we once had. One Saturday night, I was mindlessly flipping through channels, like I often did, when something unexpected stopped me. The usual late-night static and reruns gave way to a strange bumper that I had never seen before. The screen faded, and on an empty, blindingly white room, sitting right in the middle of it, was a clown, dressed head to toe in black. But there was nothing creepy about her. In fact, she seemed inviting, friendly even. There was something about her that kept me watching. My hand hovered over the remote, but curiosity got the better of me, and I set it down. The clown pulled out a pocket watch, its silver glint catching the light. She held it up for the camera, and as the hands ticked to 11 o'clock, her lips curled into a subtle, knowing smile. Slowly, she tucked the watch away and spoke directly into the camera. "It's 11 o'clock. Kiddies, you should be in bed, but since you're not, welcome to the crossing hour. We've got some new faces tuning in tonight, so let me give you a quick rundown." She glanced around as though checking the room before motioning for the camera to come closer. It zoomed in on her face until her eyes were nearly filling the screen. I couldn't help but notice her irises, an unnatural shade of yellow. She gave a little wink, and I could feel my face flush. It was like she knew I was there, like I'd been caught sneaking a peek at something forbidden. "I'm your host, Reagan Sorrows," she continued, her voice smooth. "Here's how this works. 11 to midnight, it's all spooky fun and games. But from midnight to 1, we cross into something much scarier. Younger viewers should probably turn off once we shift into the black room. That means you, hun. The camera zoomed out just enough to catch Reagan pointing directly at the screen, a playful smile tugging at her lips. It was silly, I knew that, but it felt like she was talking directly to me, like I'd stumbled onto something just for me. From that moment I was hooked. Every Saturday night I tuned into Crossing Hour without fail. It became a ritual. I never knew what to expect, and that was part of the fun. The lineup was always changing. No 2 weeks were the same, and I loved that element of surprise. It was like a game, each week waiting to see what weird and wonderful things would come on next. The first hour, known as the White Room, was pretty tame compared to what came later. It had a kind of all ages vibe, nothing too intense. I couldn't tell you everything that aired during those White Room shows, but a few things stuck with me over the years. One show was about a talking house that could transform its rooms into anything the kids inside wanted. I remember one episode where the main character turned her living room into a pirate ship and had a sword fight with animated skeletons. The animation wasn't anything special, but the imagination behind it kept me glued to the screen. Another one was a puppet show, but it wasn't like the kind you'd see on Sesame Street. These puppets were odd, almost to lifelike, their movements jerky and unsettling. The show followed them as they wandered through an endless forest, searching for something they couldn't quite remember. But what really stuck with me, what always kept me watching, was Reagan herself. Every week, she opened the show the same way, sitting in that impossibly white room, dressed in black, her yellow eyes twinkling as she welcomed us back. Almost every week, there was a new episode of Heckbusters. If you can imagine a kid-friendly version of the X-Files, you'd have the right idea, but the production value was closer to something like Goosebumps, only with a bigger budget. Every episode followed a different group of kids as they investigated paranormal mysteries all around the world. The teams changed from episode to episode. Some were only featured once, while others appeared multiple times. The common thread was that they were all part of Heckbusters International, a sort of scouts organization for monster hunters. My favorite kid from the series was David. He was the loner of his team, but he was smart, always the one coming up with plans on how to trap ghosts or deal with werewolves. And on top of that, we shared the same name. I used to imagine I was right there with him, fighting off ghouls and saving the day. His team had more episodes than any of the others, which made me happy because I got to see myself face off against monsters more often. Then there was Grimm's Palace, a puppet show centered around the Grim Reaper himself. I think it was supposed to be a parody of kid shows like Bear and the Big Blue House, but it had this strange sincerity to it. Grim, as the Reaper insisted we call him, tried his best to be the cool uncle to the audience, guiding us through life lessons. But his palace was full of annoying demons and strange creatures, and most episodes would derail, and Grim lost his temper. He'd snap at the creatures, throwing them out of the room or chasing them off screen with a scythe. The morals of the episodes were always kind of silly, but that was part of the charm. There was one episode about conflict to escalation that stuck with me, though. It was the one time Grim didn't lose his cool, and it felt surprisingly heartfelt. One of the weirdest shows had to be the timing. It was a cartoon, but unlike anything I had ever seen. The premise was simple. A giant humanoid statue would randomly appear in different time periods. A crowd would gather around it, trying to figure out what it was, and then, without warning, the statue would start moving. What followed was usually a bizarre chase through time and space with a statue transporting people to different eras and dimensions. The animation was surreal, with trippy visuals that went way over my head at the time. Looking back, it was probably a lot more artistic than I could appreciate as a kid. Then there was Tony's Rat Time Kitchen. It only aired once, and thank God for that. It was a cooking show, but the host was a giant, unsettling rat named Tony. Everything about it was wrong. The ingredients he used were moldy and rotten, yet Tony acted like he was running a regular cooking show, talking to an imaginary audience as he prepared dishes. The worst part was Tony himself. He moved fluidly to be a puppet, but he was also too stretched out to be a person in a suit. His eyes were constantly shifting, like he couldn't focus on anything. At the end of the show, Tony took a bite of his disgusting pizza, let out this weird moan of satisfaction, and said, "I'll get you to try my food one day." It was terrifying. It was so bad that Reagan actually apologized for it the following week, promising it wouldn't air again. That rat haunted my nightmares for years after, and to this day I still can't watch cooking shows without thinking of him. Lolly's Funhouse was an odd one because it didn't seem like it belonged in the Crossing Hour lineup at all. It was a typical children's show with colorful mascots named Lolly, Lule, and they'd bounce around and learn lessons about sharing, kindness, and friendship. I was way too old for it, but it had this weirdly charming quality. Every episode ended with the mascots telling the viewer how much they cared about them and what a great friend they were. Somehow, I always ended up repeating those words back as if I believed it. Silly, I know, but Lolly's Funhouse had a strange warmth to it that I couldn't ignore. But the real gem, my absolute favorite, was Regal, Radiant Retribution. It was like a mix between a superhero show and a biblical epic. Regal was this angelic robot who went around saving kids in trouble by brutally fighting off demons. Imagine something like Bibleman, but cranked up to 11 with way more intense action. The monsters in the show were terrifying, often depicted with incredible special effects. I swear, some of the puppets and suits looked so real they could have been ripped straight out of a horror movie. Unfortunately, they didn't air Regal very often, probably because it was too expensive to produce. Each episode ended the same way, with Regal speaking directly to the audience about spiritual warfare. He'd give advice about how to protect yourself from spirits, like always praying before bed or never making deals with ghosts, even if they seemed friendly. It was odd advice for a kid's show, but it stuck with me. I still think about those lessons from time to time, and I've always wondered if I could find the show online somewhere. Unfortunately, like everything else on Crossing Hour, Regal has seemingly vanished without a trace. One of the best parts of Crossing Hour was that there were never any commercials. Instead, Reagan would talk directly to the audience between shows. If Mr. Rogers was like your lovable grandpa, Reagan felt more like the cool aunt who'd let you stay up late watching R-rated movies and maybe even sneak you a sip of her beer. She told a lot of funny stories and occasionally read letters from viewers. I actually tried writing to her once, but I couldn't send it. They never showed a mailing address. In hindsight, the letters could have been fake, but I liked to think they were real. When the shows in the White Room ended, I'd usually turn off the TV and head to bed, but sometimes I stayed up just to see what would happen in the Black Room. The transition was something to witness. Reagan would say goodnight to the kids, pause for a moment, and then snap her fingers. The color in her clothes would drain, seeping into the surroundings until the entire room turned an unnaturally deep black. She'd be left in white, standing out against the darkness as she introduced the next programs. It was obviously a symbolic shift, but even as a kid, I thought it was a neat effect. In the black room, Reagan's personality changed. She was still playful, but her teasing had a sharper edge to it. She'd mock the viewer for sticking around to watch more freaky shows and taunt people who were trying to record them. It creeped me out enough to never test it out. Most of the black room shows were too intense for me, but I remember some of the ones I managed to watch in my braver moments. One of the recurring segments was Stola's Round Table. It aired every couple of weeks, and since it usually came on first, it was the black room show I saw most often. The setup was simple. A man wearing a suit, gloves, and an owl mask sat in the middle of a well-decorated study and discussed current events, science, or news. What made it creepy was that Stolas, the host, always sat in the middle of a white circle. He'd sometimes have guests, all wearing animal masks and also seated in white circles. But I noticed they didn't talk much. If a guest said something Stolas didn't like, he'd cut them off with a single word. Drivel, the word would hang in the air, and after an awkward silence, Stolas would carry on as if nothing had happened. The guests always seemed nervous after that. It was strange to see such a sinister atmosphere around what was essentially a talk show, Chainboree, hosted by a man named Cletus Cunningham, was much harder to watch. The show looked like it was filmed in a flooded basement, with Cletus, a grungy, disheveled man, talking to the camera about making real moonshine. The whole thing was recorded on a handheld camcorder. The person filming could never seem to keep the camera steady. It made the whole show feel disorienting, like a fever dream. At one point, someone in the background started moaning for help, and that's when I turned it off. The shaky camera was making me queasy anyway. One time, I caught a nature special that focused on a camera being lowered into the ocean. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary as the camera descended deeper and deeper into the water. But when it reached the depths where no light could penetrate, the show became unsettling. After several minutes of pitch-black silence, strange groaning sounds echoed through the water. It sounded almost like chanting, but before I could figure out what it was, the camera jerked violently, and the screen went to a static-filled technical difficulties screen for the rest of the episode. The scariest one, though, was an untitled show that I stumbled upon. It started in a dark room filled with shiny, glistening threads. A soft, disembodied voice welcomed the viewer, thanking us for coming to its home. It sounded friendly at first, but the mood quickly shifted when it began talking about preparing dinner. As it spoke, I noticed something large creeping closer to the camera. By the time I realized it was a giant spider, its many eyes were glittering menacingly in the dark. I scrambled to turn the TV off before it could come any closer. That show cemented my fear of spiders for life. Another show, which only aired once, was especially bizarre. It looked like home video footage of a man walking through a house. He never showed his face, and there was no explanation for why he was there. Halfway through the footage, he started filming people sleeping in their beds. He didn't do anything to them or say a word. He just stood there and filmed. The show ended when the cameraman went down into the basement and zoomed in on someone sitting in front of a TV. The person turned around, startled, and the show abruptly cut to black. I couldn't make out the person's face, but something about it felt wrong. Despite the nightmares that crossing hour gave me, I couldn't stop watching. It became this secret part of my life that I couldn't talk to anyone about. If I told my parents, they'd know I was staying up too late, and none of the other kids at school believed me when I tried to bring it up. Eventually, I just embraced it, thinking of myself as part of an exclusive club. It made the creepy stuff feel more bearable, like I was in on something nobody else could understand. And then one night I stopped watching altogether because of a specific show that pushed things too far. It started like any other night. There was an episode of Heckbusters featuring David, of course, followed by an amazing Regal. Radiant Retribution, where Regal fought off a gauntlet of monsters. He even decapitated the leader, which was honestly one of the coolest moments in the whole show. I was riding the high of the night when Regan said her usual goodnight, snapping us over to the black room. I was just about to turn off the TV when something stopped me. I'd just turned 9 the day before, and I guess that made me feel like I could handle whatever the black room had to offer. So I settled back in for another round. The first show was another episode of Stola's. Nothing unusual. But after it ended, instead of Reagan's typical introduction to the next program, something different happened. The screen faded to an empty black room, and off-screen, I could hear Reagan arguing with someone. Her voice was sharper, angrier than I'd ever heard it. After a few moments, someone pointed out that they were live. Reagan stepped into frame, adjusting her outfit with a forced smile, but it was clear she was still furious. I watched, frozen, as the figure began to take more definite form. What started as a haze of static now resembled something far more tangible, almost human but not quite. Its long, unnaturally thin limbs moved with a fluidity that seemed unnatural, as if its joints bent in ways they shouldn't. Each time it looked at the camera, my skin crawled, the voice deepened, becoming smoother, more commanding. I know what some of you are thinking. You're wondering what you'd have to give for one of my deals. A soul? Maybe your sanity? It chuckled. No, devoted ones. It's so much simpler than that. All I need is an invitation. Let me into your world, your home, your life. The figure moved closer to the camera. I instinctively backed away from the screen. Come on now, it whispered. Don't be shy. Just say the words. Let me in. I can give you anything you desire. The static on the screen pulsed in time with the words, making it hard to think straight. My hand hovered over the remote again, but the same voice echoed through my mind. Don't touch that. I jerked my hand back into my lap, heart pounding in my chest. The figure continued to pace, as if it knew it had all the time in the world. What about you? It said, fixing its gaze directly on me. Yes, you watching right now. You've been so quiet. Haven't you ever wanted something so badly? You'd do anything to get it. Just a word, and I am yours. For a terrifying moment, it felt like the thing was aware of me specifically. My throat tightened, and I wanted nothing more than to turn off the TV and run. But something held me in place. The static figure stopped pacing. It cocked its head as if listening to something just out of frame, then turned back to the camera with a smile that didn't belong on any human face. Oh, I hear it. You're curious, aren't you? You want to know what happens next. But I'll tell you a secret. It leaned in closer. This story doesn't have to end here. All you have to do is say yes. The static grew louder, sharper, as the figure slowly raised its hand toward the camera, fingers stretching impossibly long. My heart was racing now. I could feel a pressure building in the room, like something heavy pressing against my chest. Without thinking, I bolted upright and grabbed the remote, my hands shaking. Don't you dare. The voice screamed, but I ignored it. With all the strength I had, I slammed my thumb onto the power button. The TV clicked off. I stood there, breathing hard in the sudden silence of my bedroom. The room felt too dark, too quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My eyes darted around the room, half expecting that figure to still be there, lingering in the shadows, but there was nothing. No static, no voice, just the distant hum of the fan and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I collapsed onto my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I wanted to pretend that it hadn't happened, that it was just some freaky show, but deep down, I knew it had been something else, something real. I didn't turn the TV back on that night. In fact, I didn't watch The Black Room or Crossing Hour ever again. It was too dangerous. I wonder if it still reaches out to others, searching for someone reckless enough to say yes. I wonder how many have answered. And I hope, wherever they are now, they realize the price they paid before it's too late. In the years that passed after my first encounter with Crossing Hour, I never completely escaped the feeling that something had been waiting for me to come back. That one episode of Invitation haunted me more than anything else I had ever experienced on the show. The nightmares, the strange woman on my bed, and the feeling that something dark had whispered my name, they were all too real. Yet I wanted so badly to believe it was all in my head. That's why I kept searching for the show. Part of me hoped I'd imagined it, and maybe, if I could find it again, I could prove to myself that it had just been some sick late-night program. But no matter how hard I try, Crossing Hour had disappeared completely, like it never existed. Every time I asked about it, either on forums or among friends, the responses were always the same. Never heard of it. As the years went by, Crossing Hour faded into the back of my mind like a distant memory, one I wasn't sure if I wanted to remember or forget. The only times it resurfaced were in strange dreams, Reagan's voice echoing in my head, or that grotesque figure lurking just out of sight, offering its deals in the dark. But they became rare, and life moved on. Then one night, out of nowhere, the memories hit me full force. It was late, and I couldn't sleep, so I was flipping through channels on my phone when a cooking show came on. The familiar sight of a kitchen, a host happily talking about ratatouille, triggered something in me. It all came rushing back: the rat in Regal's kitchen, the strange voices, the distorted creatures. I felt like I was 12 again, sitting in that dark apartment, terrified by what I saw on the screen. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I'd left unfinished with Crossing Hour, something I needed to understand. That's why I'm posting this now. I don't expect many of you to remember the show, but if any of you do, I need to know. Did it air in other places? Do any of you have tapes of it? Especially of the older episodes. I'd love to relive the safer times with Regal and the Black Room. Reagan was always my favorite host, but please keep Invitation away. I don't care how curious you are. I don't want to remember that part, and I definitely don't want to see it again, because if you do find it and you start watching, if that thing starts talking to you, you won't be able to turn it off, and this time, it might not be as easy to walk away. Growing up, my dad was my hero. I looked up to him like no one else. No matter how tough things got or what problems he faced, he always had a smile for me. That's why what happened makes no sense to me. My mom was amazing too, and deep down, I was always a mommy's boy. I'd do anything to make her happy, but one day, something changed in her. She seemed distant, like something was really bothering her. I overheard her talking to my grandmother on the phone one night, and I'm sure she suspected my dad of cheating. For her, that would have been unforgivable. She mentioned this weird smell coming from his clothes. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe he was just working harder than usual. I decided to talk to him. I thought I could handle the truth better than my mom. I just needed to know for myself. That night, as my mom cooked dinner, I sat at the table waiting. My dad, who was never late, was already over an hour behind. As we ate, I saw my mom glance at the empty plate where my dad usually sat, then up at the clock. I stayed quiet, not wanting to let on that I knew something was going on. Finally, more than 2 hours late, he snuck in through the back door. When I stood up, he gave me a nervous smile before heading straight for the basement. This wasn't like him at all, and I knew something was wrong. I followed him down the narrow basement stairs, and that's when I noticed the strange smell my mom had mentioned. It was hard to describe, kind of like an old, musty sock mixed with the smell of an elderly home. As I got closer, I heard him on the phone, crying, begging someone for forgiveness. When I reached the last step, it creaked loudly. My dad noticed me immediately, and his usual warm smile was replaced by a terrifying, hate-filled glare. It was as if he didn't recognize me. He lunged at me, grabbing me by my shirt. I was frozen with fear. This wasn't the dad I knew. But then something changed. The fear on my face seemed to snap him out of it, and he let go, pulling me into a tight hug, almost as if he was ashamed of what had just happened. As he hugged me, I noticed the phone still in his hand, and I could hear someone laughing on the other end. Suddenly, he stopped hugging me and retreated back into the dark corner of the basement, crying again. The next day, I followed him to work. I sat in a coffee shop across from his office, waiting for him to leave. I hoped, prayed, even that he was cheating. At least that would make some sense. When he left, he had the same disturbed look on his face as he did in the basement. He kept checking his watch and headed in the opposite direction of home. I followed him for about 20 minutes until he reached this old, run-down house. I couldn't believe it. While my mom was probably worried sick about him, he was walking into this creepy house, determined to find out what was going on. I followed him. I banged on the door as hard as I could, waiting for what felt like forever. But no one answered. I decided to check the back of the house. As I passed by one of the windows, something caught my eye. To my horror, there was my dad sitting in a chair in an empty room, crying. I banged on the window, trying to get his attention, but he ignored me. He was staring at something, and whatever it was, it terrified him. I couldn't understand why he didn't just get up and leave. He wasn't tied to the chair or anything. He just sat there barefoot, looking scared out of his mind. I kept yelling for him to move, but then I saw it. Something was crawling towards him. It moved unnaturally, dragging itself across the floor. It almost looked human, but with long hair covering its thin, bony body. The closer it got, the more my dad cried. I tried to break the window, but the rocks just bounced off. The creature sniffed the ground, as if searching for something, and then stopped. When it reached my dad's feet, he stopped, looking scared at that point. The creature started licking his feet with this long, slimy, snake-like tongue, and my dad started laughing uncontrollably. He laughed so hard that he ended up wetting himself. The sight of my dad laughing like that while the creature licked his feet was horrifying. As I stood there helpless, I noticed someone else in the room. They looked like a child, but old and creepy at the same time. They were giving orders to the creature, getting more excited the longer it went on. Then an old woman entered the room. The childlike figure seemed afraid of her and backed away into the corner. The old woman walked up to my dad and started collecting his tears in a small glass vial. My dad just sat there, and I couldn't understand why he didn't run. I was trying to figure out how to get him out of there when I suddenly smelled that same strange odor from the basement. Before I could react, something hit me in the head, and everything went black. When I woke up, it was dark, and the house looked empty. I rushed home, hoping to find my dad there and praying that everything I saw was just a bad dream. When I got home, the light in the kitchen was on. As I walked in, I was hit by that awful smell again. This time, it wasn't my dad, it was my mom. She was huddled under the table, crying, with the same terrified look on her face that my dad had. She was on the phone, apologizing to someone, sobbing. I grabbed the phone from her and demanded to know who was on the other end. All I heard was maniacal laughter. As I begged them to leave us alone, the phone went quiet. Then a voice whispered, "Your mother's tears will taste even sweeter than your father's." Lives. Even though none of this is technically my fault. I mean, it's not like I want to be mysteriously drawn to a creepy, possibly haunted power plant in the middle of the night, right? It all started about 3 weeks ago, when I noticed that I'd been having these bizarre, vivid dreams about the plant. In the dreams, I was always standing at the edge of the property, staring at the dark, looming silhouette of the building. I never entered the plant, but there was always this overwhelming urge to get closer, to step inside and see what was hidden in the shadows. Every time I woke up, I felt this gnawing pull to go there for real. At first, it was easy to shake off. I'd tell myself it was just a dream or a side effect of the stress I was under from school. But then, during the day, I'd start zoning out, just walking along campus, minding my own business, and suddenly I'd find myself heading in the direction of the power plant. I wasn't even conscious of doing it. I'd just snap back to reality and realize I was halfway there, with no idea how or why. That's when things got scary. Cassie was the first one to notice something was off. We were supposed to meet at the library for a study session, but I never showed up. I didn't answer her texts, and when she called me, my phone went straight to voicemail. After freaking out for about an hour, she tracked me down by sheer luck, I might add, wandering along the path that led to the power plant. I had no memory of leaving my dorm or of walking in that direction. 1 minute I was studying, and the next thing I knew, I was outside in the freezing cold, with Cassie shaking me by the shoulders and demanding to know what the hell was going on. That's when I told her about the dreams, and that's when she got Maria involved. And that's how this whole plan was hatched. To be fair, they're trying to protect me, and I appreciate that. I just hate feeling like a child under constant supervision, like I've lost control of my own life. But then again, maybe I have. The worst part is I can feel it getting stronger, the pull. It's like something inside me is gradually losing the fight, and one day I won't be able to stop myself from heading straight for that plant. And when that day comes, I don't know what will happen, but I'm terrified that whatever's waiting for me inside that place will be worse than anything I've imagined so far. Maybe that's why they're all so worried. Maybe that's why Cassie is willing to slap me awake if it comes to that, because I can tell they're scared too. But the truth is, I'm more afraid of the day I stop being scared altogether, because that will mean it's won. Whatever it is, I felt a knot in my stomach as I hit send on the message to Grayson. The situation was dire, and it felt wrong to involve him, especially given the circumstances of our last encounter. But I was out of options, and the urgency of the moment overshadowed my reservations. Cassie and Maria were already on their way. I caught up with them at the base of the English building, and we made our way to the side entrance. We were joined by several members of the Folklore Society, who were anxiously pacing around and discussing what little they knew about the situation. Their faces were a mixture of worry and determination. A few minutes later, Grayson arrived. He looked around, confusion etched on his face as he took in the sight of everyone gathered. I quickly filled him in on the details of what was happening. So the creature is just sitting outside the classroom door, he asked, trying to wrap his head around it. That's right, I said, nodding. It's been there for 20 minutes and doesn't show any signs of leaving. The class ends in about 10 minutes, Grayson frowned. And the Folklore Society hasn't figured out a way to get the students out. They've been brainstorming, I said, but with the creature so close to the door, they're afraid of causing a panic or making things worse. Grayson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. All right, let's think this through. We need to get the students out of there without triggering the creature. One of the Folklore Society members, a tall guy named Ethan, stepped forward. We've considered the fire alarm, but it's too risky. We also thought about distracting it, but that might not work. We need something to either drive it away or provide a safe escape route for the students. As we discussed our options, I noticed that the students inside the classroom were starting to get restless. Some were trying to peek out the door, and the whispers and cries were growing louder. It was clear that the situation was becoming more tense. Okay, Grayson said, breaking into my thoughts. How about this? If we can create a diversion, we might be able to lure the creature away from the door long enough for the students to escape. We'd need to be quick and coordinated. That could work, Cassie agreed. But what kind of diversion? I'm not sure yet, Grayson admitted. Maybe something that makes a lot of noise or attracts attention. We could set off some fireworks or something similar. Fireworks might be too much, Maria said. What about creating a disturbance somewhere else? Something loud but controlled. We could try that, Grayson said. If we can get it far enough away from the door, we might be able to get the students out. The group quickly made a plan to create a diversion. Cassie and Maria went off to gather supplies, while Grayson and I stayed with the Folklore Society members to keep an eye on the creature and ensure that it stayed in place. The next few minutes felt like hours. We could see the students growing increasingly anxious inside the classroom, and I felt a surge of guilt at not being able to help them directly. Eventually, Cassie and Maria returned with a portable speaker and some other equipment. They set up the speaker and started playing a recording of loud, jarring noises that would hopefully draw the creature's attention away from the door. We waited with bated breath as the sounds blared through the speaker. The creature, still sitting outside the classroom, seemed to react immediately. It shifted its attention, moving away from the door as if drawn by the nose. That's it, Grayson said, nodding. Now's our chance. We watched as the Folklore Society members quickly ushered the students out of the classroom and down the nearest exit. It was a tense few minutes, but it seemed like the plan was working. As the last of the students exited, we began to pack up the equipment. The creature seemed to be moving away from the building, reacting to the noises as intended. That was too close, Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We need to figure out a better way to handle this in the future. I nodded in agreement. We do, but for now we've managed to get everyone out safely. Grayson turned to me. Thanks for reaching out. It was the right call. Yeah, I said. Thanks for coming. As we made our way away from the building, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The situation had been handled for now, but the threat was far from over. Whatever was causing the disturbances wasn't going away, and neither were the dangers that came with it. For now, though, I was just grateful that we had managed to avert a disaster, but I knew that the battle was far from over, and that the power plant and whatever lay within it was still out there, waiting. I just want to be sure everything goes according to plan. I finished for him. I'm not letting anyone get hurt, if I can help it. Grayson's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained vigilant. Fine, but stay out of the way and be ready to move if things go south. I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. We crept further into the building, the silence of the empty halls amplifying the tension. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows that only heightened the sense of foreboding. Grayson led the way, his movements purposeful and quiet. We approached the staircase, and he paused, listening intently. I could hear the faint, ominous sounds of the creature just beyond the classroom door. "There's our bait," Grayson murmured, pointing toward the Folklore Society member we had designated. He was crouched at the bottom of the staircase, looking every bit the part of the nervous but determined volunteer. Grayson took a deep breath and nodded at him. "All right, let's go. The sooner we get this over with, the better." The Folklore Society member began his run, sprinting toward the opposite end of the hallway, making as much noise as possible. The creature, which had been eerily silent, seemed to react immediately. We heard a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something heavy moving quickly. Grayson and I watched from a safe distance as the creature emerged from the hallway, its form still shrouded in shadows, but unmistakably sinister. It was a horrible, writhing mass of darkness and shifting shapes, seemingly composed of every conceivable nightmare. The creature's focus was entirely on the running figure. It lumbered down the hallway with disturbing speed, its eyes glowing faintly as it followed the bait dot. As the creature moved further away, Grayson glanced at me. "Now's our chance. We need to get everyone out of here." I nodded and turned back to the entrance. The Folklore Society members were already working to clear out students who had been kept away by the false alarm. They were directing them to safety, and a few students were still confused, but thankfully unharmed. Grayson and I moved quickly, making sure everyone who had been stuck in the building was accounted for. I glanced back toward the staircase, where the creature had been drawn, hoping that the distraction was enough to keep it occupied. Once we had cleared the area and ensured everyone was safe, we regrouped outside. The adrenaline was still rushing through me, making it hard to calm down. Cassie, who had been anxiously waiting with the others, rushed over to me. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes darting around. "Did it work?" "Yeah," I said, panting. "We got everyone out. The creature followed the bait, so it should be far from the building now." Cassie looked at Grayson, who had joined us. "And you, what do you know about how to deal with it next time?" Grayson's expression was unreadable. "For now, we need to lay low and not provoke it further. I'll see what I can do to get more information and find a better way to handle it. This isn't over, but at least we bought some time." The Folklore Society members exchanged worried glances, but they seemed relieved that the immediate danger had passed. Grayson's calm, though slightly detached, demeanor did little to soothe their concerns. As we all stood there, taking stock of what had just happened, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. The immediate threat was dealt with, but the underlying problem remained unresolved. The power plant, the creatures, and whatever other dangers lurked out there were still a part of our lives. And as I looked around at the worried faces of my friends and the determined expression of Grayson, I knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. Cassie placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did good today. We all did. But we need to keep our eyes open and be ready for whatever comes next." I nodded, knowing she was right. The night's events had shown us just how dangerous things could get, but they had also brought us together in a way that was both comforting and unnerving. For now, we had survived, and we would face whatever came next together. Didn't want to see someone else I cared about be killed. Maybe that was it. I'm not sure. "So what are you going to do when it gets down here?" I asked. "Instead, we're going to chat," he said grimly. "I'll explain that it can't keep hunting like this, and if it keeps at it, Then I will find a way to drag it outside and it will die. Holy shit. I wasn't sure if it was because I knew he was inhuman now, and he didn't have to hide parts of himself anymore, or if he was just that fed up, but from the tone of Grayson's voice it was clear that he meant what he said. He would take on the thing in the hallway if he had to, which was something not even the laundry lady dared to do. Not until it was either that or watch me die, I started to ask Grayson what he was, because this meant he wasn't like the president. He was something different, something with actual power behind him. But there was a bang like a gunshot from deep inside the building. Grayson's brow furrowed. The stairwell doors. That's what that was, he whispered. We should have propped those open. That's going to slow our bait down. Cool, cool. So even Inhumans can miscalculate. Great to know. I began to breathe rapidly, short, panicked breaths as my mind screamed that this was all going wrong and it would be my fault because I'd invited Grayson here and they'd trusted me. In retrospect, I'm not sure if he was yelling at me or the creature in the hallway. There was a sound like the patter of raindrops, I thought, except it wasn't rain. It was footsteps. Footsteps at a run, and suddenly they were there, all of them. Cassie and Maria, and the entire inner circle of the Folklore Society. They were all round me, and I felt more hands on my arms, and I twisted my head and saw hands around Grayson's arms, and his waist as well. They were all hanging on and pulling and yelling at each other. And then it turned into one chorus, with Cassie's voice the loudest, yelling at all of them to pull, and they did in unison, and on the second pull I felt my legs slip in the creature's grip. I stared up at its eyes, barely visible underneath sagging flesh. It stared down at me with shining black ORB asked up my friends had come for me, because they didn't hate me. They didn't think I was worthless. They were here, risking their lives, dragging me out of the grip of something monstrous, and I felt the creature's grip relinquish, and it began to retreat. Grayson followed it, alone, walking steadily towards it, following it as it slithered backwards down the hallway. He was saying something, but his voice was muted, and I could not hear the words. Then it vanished into the stairwell, and the door slammed shut behind it. Cassie was almost crying with relief. She grabbed me, hugged me, then shook me and yelled that I couldn't keep doing this to her, that she couldn't handle it anymore. Then she hugged me again, and then there was some more shaking and yelling. Did we stop it? The Folklore Society president asked anxiously once everyone had calmed down a little. Temporarily, Grayson replied, having rejoined the group. Hopefully it won't resurface until next year. What did you do? Gave it a stern warning. He answered the president casually, without hesitation, and the president only stared at him in suspicion. He clearly didn't believe Grayson, but I think Grayson was being perfectly honest. I think he did warn off the creature from misbehaving. I'm not sure if we got it close enough to the entrance for Grayson's authority to work, but Grayson seemed confident. So I'm going to assume that warning will be enough. What if it isn't? I think I know how to handle that creature, those emotions I felt when it turned its attention on me. These creatures are a reflection of our fears, and this campus is absolutely brimming with anxious wrecks desperately afraid they'll fail at school, at life, everything, myself included. Sometimes, late at night, it feels like those fears are my entire world, like they've grown inside my chest and up my throat, cutting off my ability to breathe, choking me. If that is the root of what created this creature, then the way to defeat it is also a reflection of reality. I suggested this to Cassie after we'd all parted ways. Grayson seemed like he wanted to follow us back to our apartment, but Cassie did that I'm watching you thing with her fingers at him, and he seemed to think it prudent to have the so your best friend's ex-boyfriend isn't human conversation some other day. I think we need to change the rule I said once we were back at our apartment. We didn't kill that thing, but we beat it. We won. All of us together. It's dangerous, and there's no guarantee it'll work. But it's better than simply accepting that someone is going to die every time it emerges from the depths of the building. Rule number 2. If you fall asleep in class and no one is around when you wake up, stay at your desk. Pretend you're taking notes, don't look up, and don't look around, no matter what you hear. You'll be returned to your classroom when it leaves. Rule number 2A. If someone does look at the creature in the hallway, everyone in the class must stop them from leaving. Grab hold of them, grab hold of each other, and pull them away from the door. Do not let go until the creature retreats. This is the only way to save their life. The 1924 expedition to summit Mount Everest was not the sophisticated venture that modern expeditions are. It was a makeshift team of English survivalists, guided by Sherpas, who were often treated as if their lives were expendable. They were on their second attempt in 2 years, facing immense pressure that could alter a person's mental state. This pressure might manifest something into the unknown. Such a monumental event could have ripples through dimensions we barely understand. Humanity has always conquered extreme challenges, but reaching the highest point on Earth is the ultimate test. It stands as the pinnacle of human achievement and perhaps something beyond us. Today, over 4,000 people have made the pilgrimage to Everest's peak, transforming it into a pricey adventure for the wealthy and thrill-seekers, but it once held profound significance. The first true summit attempt was particularly notable, not only because it was the last time George Mallory and Sandy Irvine were seen alive, but also due to other unexplained phenomena on the mountain. On their third attempt during this expedition, something extraordinary occurred. It was as if divine forces had cursed humanity for its arrogance. Mallory and Irvine were seen close to the summit, but then clouds rolled in, and they were never seen alive again. The event felt biblical in its impact. Sometimes reality is more bizarre than fiction. It is challenging to craft a story more compelling than real-life chaos. Occasionally, chaos aligns in such a way that it feels as if the universe itself is ticking away a cosmic clock. This mystery remains so tantalizing that it cast a lingering doubt over the 1953 official summit by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Many believe that Mallory and Irvine might have reached the summit before them. This lingering doubt is like a persistent memory embedded in the mountain's face. There is something sinister buried deep within Everest. Reality is indeed stranger than fiction. I know this firsthand because I have seen what truly happened on that fateful day in 1924. I have seen the photographs taken by Mallory and Irvine in their final moments. When Mallory and Irvine attempted to reach the summit, they brought a camera with them to capture mankind's greatest achievement. The camera has not been officially found. The public and climbing community are still unaware of its whereabouts. I am here to reveal that this obscurity is deliberate and orchestrated by forces beyond imagination. It is exactly what they want you to believe. I developed the film myself. I have looked into the abyss, and it has consumed me. I carry the burden of what was captured on that primitive technology. I do not have much time left. That is why I am sharing this burden. I am not old, but I am suffering from a severe illness that has aged me beyond my years. Perhaps releasing this weight will allow me to finally rest in peace, knowing that someone will understand the truth about what happened up there, especially concerning Irvine. I hope he was killed instantly, for that would be the least unsettling outcome. What troubles me most is the uncertainty of his fate. He might even still be out there in a form beyond our comprehension. I am getting ahead of myself. Every piece of information about that day spins my mind in circles. Kodak is known primarily for its photographic film, cameras, and development processes. As a budding chemical engineer in my field, it is difficult to accept that my life has diminished to this insignificant point. I had so much career hope and optimism. Now, it is a struggle to get out of bed in the morning. My role in this puzzle seems fated from the beginning. I feel as if I was killed off in the first act, waiting silently for the end. This silence must be broken. Kodak developed a close relationship with the government over time. During the early nuclear tests in the Nevada desert, all our X-ray paper was contaminated with high-energy particles. We never received hush money like that again. We were involuntarily complicit. We knew and kept quiet. The government had an agenda, and we had to comply. Men in suits and badges frequently visited us without warning. They never took anything but asked vague questions, offering forced smiles, and lingering in our labs and warehouses. They knew something we did not, and we had to endure their presence. It was as if we were living in a surveillance state where every glance was monitored and whispered conversations were noted. Any questions he asked were met with polite smiles and condescending laughs, as if we were naive children asking about the origins of life. It was evident that they had a plan for us. They were conditioning us, making us accustomed to their presence, waiting for the moment when we would submit to their orders. That moment arrived in the mid-2000s, when we learned about the fateful roll of film. One day they burst into the lab, and down the hallway I saw a cart being pushed through film stock inventory into the development lab. The hallway was long, and the squeak of the cart's free-spinning wheel echoed past shelves of equipment and undeveloped rolls of film. The cart was surrounded by armed guards, signaling that something of immense importance was inside. The cart held a heavily modified safe, small like those found in gas station counters. It had a climate control system attached, which did not require external power and emitted hints of freon and the musty smell of old books. Two large men pushed the cart into our lab, followed by a man I would come to resent. Along with several assistants, he wore a slim-fit suit that seemed too tight for his figure. The stress of his job was evident in his bulging stomach and love handles. The bags under his eyes and thinning blonde hair spoke volumes about his mental state. He looked like a man broken by his experiences. He was one of them, and they had extinguished the light in his eyes. His name was Jerome Newton. I do not entirely blame him for my downfall. He was merely following orders. I am perhaps suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. I have always been too compliant. We exchange polite handshakes and engage in small talk, but the massive safe and its security detail quickly became the focus of our conversation. It had been discovered Irvine's camera had been found decades earlier. In fact, they had been waiting for the right time to examine its contents, and our lab was chosen for this purpose. They never disclosed how the camera was recovered or where it had been kept, and at that time I was given no information about Irvine's body. In retrospect, it all makes sense. They knew our scientific curiosity would overpower any resistance we had. We had a feeling that refusing was not an option, and no one ever did. My greatest regret is not being able to explain to my family what happened. They thought I went to work and never returned. I wish I could see them one last time. My involvement in this operation erased me from public records Without my consent, I became a ghost. As far as the United States was concerned, I had disappeared. Of course, there was resistance, and things reached a climax. But humans fear the unknown. We never fully understood their capabilities. They made it clear that dire consequences awaited us if our new arrangements were unsatisfactory. We worked on site at a discreet location. Kodak had several manufacturing sites away from the public eye, and our development lab was chosen for its unassuming nature. They provided for all our needs: food, water, shelter, but information was on a need-to-know basis. We dedicated ourselves to preserving the film with the utmost care. The film was old, exposed to the harsh conditions of the mountain for decades. It was uncertain whether it would yield any usable images, but we would only find out during development. We spent 2 weeks meticulously planning how to safely transport the film to our lab and develop it. Every precaution was detailed. The lab floors were coated in a rubberized substrate to prevent accidental slips. We were given daily sterilized uniforms and trained on containment breach protocols. These uniforms were incinerated after each workday. The room was swept clean of every speck of dust, and air filtration systems were installed. For those 2 weeks, it might have been the cleanest room on Earth. Every tool, machine, and chemical necessary for the task was sent by same-day air if it was even suggested. It was almost miraculous to witness. For every unethical act committed by the United States, they performed 10 logistical miracles when the day arrived to open the camera's containment unit. It was almost comical how small the camera was, considering the immense resources spent on it. We all chuckled when the safe door swung open. The camera was carefully disassembled in the darkroom. We quickly became accustomed to the presence of armed guards. We felt like prisoners, but it was reassuring to finally be doing my work again. It was a welcome distraction from the overwhelming isolation of that room. The photos were developed with the highest purity materials available. Where they sourced these materials from, I cannot say, but it was clear they knew more about photography than we did. Jerome and I examined the first image as it emerged. At first, it appeared as a blank white rectangle. The film had been exposed to sunlight at some point between taking the photo and its time on the mountain. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. Then something else started to appear. It was as if the image was being breathed into existence, like God breathing life into Adam. Small black smudges gradually materialized into the developed image. We observed as this Rorschach-like negative space became increasingly detailed. We started to piece together what it depicted. It seemed to show a column of light so intense that the camera's primitive lenses were almost completely blown out. This beam appeared to be emanating from the ground at the exact summit of the mountain. It resembled an energy field, something you might see in a science fiction show. It was a strange and eerie sensation, sitting in silence and holding our breaths. We simultaneously understood that Mallory and Irvine had indeed reached the summit first, but as the photo developed, it revealed an overpowering light source, stronger than the sun, overtaking their camera. There was a silhouette halfway within the beam, an indistinct smudge at the threshold. We spent 30 minutes debating what we were witnessing, while the other images gradually appeared. Our attention shifted to the subsequent images, and our jaws dropped in horror. Our eyes widened in unison. The second image following the beam was a close-up of the top knuckles of a hand, showing the pointer and middle fingers and the entire thumb. They were lying on the fresh snow like a grotesque display. The thumb was still attached to a piece of glove. There was no visible pool of blood against the white snow. It was as if the fingers had been burned off and fallen like autumn leaves. The image had a clinical, almost detached quality, like a crime scene photograph. The very tips of the fingernails were blue, indicating the onset of frostbite. The hand's owner had presumably suffered extreme cold. This shocking discovery was just the beginning. Each subsequent image offered a glimpse into a mystery that defied explanation, a mystery that continues to provoke questions about what truly happened on Everest in 1924. As we progressed through the roll of film, the images became more unsettling, each one adding to the disturbing puzzle of what happened to Mallory and Irvine on their fateful journey. It became clear that this was no ordinary climb. The photographs revealed a sequence of events that defied any logical explanation. The third image was a chilling revelation. It showed a distorted view of what appeared to be a makeshift shelter, but there was something fundamentally wrong with it. The proportions were off, and the edges seemed to warp and twist unnaturally, as if the very fabric of reality was bending around the summit. The shelter looked almost like a mirage, an illusion of safety in the midst of an unforgiving landscape. The fourth image was perhaps the most haunting. It depicted a shadowy figure, barely discernible against the snow. This figure was not fully in the frame, but it was clear that it was moving away from the camera. It was as if the figure was being pulled or dragged rather than walking. The way it blurred and twisted suggested that the figure was not bound by the same physical constraints as ordinary human beings. It was a ghostly presence that seemed to be caught between realms. By the fifth image, we were confronted with a horrifying sight. The photo showed what appeared to be a pair of eyes, large, dark, and wide open, staring directly into the camera. The eyes were not in any recognizable face, but seemed to float in the void of the photograph. The intensity of their gaze was unsettling, as if they were peering directly into the observer's soul. The sixth image was a close-up of a section of the mountain itself. It was covered in what appeared to be blood-red streaks, resembling claw marks or scratches. The surrounding snow was discolored, as if it had been tainted by something unearthly. The sheer scale of the marks suggested a struggle of unimaginable proportions, something that defied the normal physics of the mountain. As each image developed, it became increasingly apparent that Mallory and Irvine had encountered something beyond human understanding. The sequence of photos told a story of an expedition that had ventured too far, too deep into a realm where the natural laws no longer apply. The final photograph was the most perplexing of all. It was an abstract, almost formless mass of light and shadow, a swirling vortex of colors and shapes that defied interpretation. It looked like a cosmic anomaly, something that belonged in the realm of science fiction rather than a historical expedition. The image had a disturbing quality, as if it was trying to convey a message that no human mind could comprehend. Jerome and I sat in silence, the weight of what we had witnessed pressing heavily upon us. The photographs had uncovered a truth that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. We were no longer dealing with a simple mountaineering tragedy, but with a glimpse into a world where reality and myth collided in a spectacular and unsettling fashion. We were bound by an unspoken agreement to keep this information confidential. The government had made it clear that any breach of secrecy would have severe consequences. We were to preserve the integrity of the findings while maintaining the illusion of a routine development process. As much as we wanted to share our discovery, the fear of reprisal kept us silent. The photographs were secured in the archives, and the camera was returned to its mysterious origin. The images were never meant to see the light of day, and the world continued to view the Everest expeditions through the lens of official history. Mallory and Irvine's fate remained a matter of speculation, while the truth was buried under layers of secrecy and fear. In the years that followed, I continued my work under constant surveillance, my life overshadowed by the knowledge of what I had seen. My career stagnated, and my personal life became a series of increasingly hollow routines. The burden of the truth weighed heavily on me, and I knew that my time was running out. Now, as I confront my own mortality, I am compelled to share this story. The photographs have been hidden from the public for too long. The truth about what happened on Everest in 1924 is more complex and terrifying than anyone could imagine. It is a reminder of the thin boundary between our world and the unknown, a boundary that should never be crossed without considering the consequences. The mystery of Mallory and Irvine will forever remain one of history's greatest enigmas. The images from that fateful expedition are a testament to the incredible and inexplicable forces that lie just beyond our understanding. It is a story that transcends time and space, challenging our perceptions of reality and reminding us that some mysteries are best left unsolved. As I prepare to leave this world, I hope that my story will provide some measure of clarity to those who seek the truth. The photographs are not just relics of a bygone era. They are a window into the unknown, a glimpse into a reality that defies explanation. And perhaps in sharing this truth, I can finally find the peace that has eluded me for so long. It was a bitterly cold December night in 2017. The snow covered everything in sight, and the air was filled with the stillness that only winter brings. My best friend, Jack, had come over to my house for a sleepover. It was something we did quite often, especially when the holiday season made us feel more adventurous than usual. We were bored, trying to pass the time with casual conversation, YouTube videos, and jokes. However, that night Jack seemed to have something else in mind. "Mark, I read about these rituals," Jack said, his face serious but curious. I burst into laughter, shaking my head. "Rituals? Come on. Are you serious? Do you really believe in that stuff?" I teased him, my laughter echoing through the room. Jack gave a nervous chuckle and shrug. "Not really, but think about it. Even if they do not work, it will still be a fun story to tell, right? Something memorable." He had that look in his eyes, the one that always managed to rope me into whatever idea he had in mind. Against my better judgment, I agreed. It was a decision I would soon come to regret deeply. Jack had come across a website called The Ghost in My Machine, a site filled with strange rituals and urban legends. As he scrolled through the list, one particular ritual caught both of our attention. The closet game. The premise was simple. You needed a dark closet and a few matches. I half joked about him burning down my house with this ridiculous ritual, but he assured me that it was harmless. All I had to do was take the clothes out of my closet, and we could give it a try. Reluctantly, I agreed. We gathered what we needed, and Jack, being the genius that he thought he was, insisted that I should be the one to perform the ritual. According to the rules, it only required one person. Jack waited outside my room, glued to his phone, scrolling through Instagram and watching random YouTube videos. I turned off all the lights, took a deep breath, and stepped into the closet. I stood in complete darkness, my heart racing, though I kept telling myself it was just a silly game. I mentally rehearsed the instructions. Began at night, darken the room, ... The silence in the closet was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, I recited the phrase from the ritual, "Show me the light or leave me in darkness." I waited for something to happen, whispers, footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. Not a sound. I let out a sigh of relief, but my nerves were still on edge. Against the instructions, I opened the closet door and turned on the light. Nothing was out of place. I laughed at myself for even considering that it would work. Jack came back into the room, and I told him it was all nonsense. We laughed it off, grabbing snacks and sitting down to watch more YouTube. But Jack, being Jack, was not ready to give up just yet. "Let's try another one," he said, pulling up another ritual. This one was called the staircase ritual. Despite my skepticism, I agreed. For the next 20 minutes, we followed the steps meticulously, but again nothing. Frustrated, I swore off these rituals altogether. I was done with it, or so I thought. A few days passed, and Jack messaged me on Discord, suggesting we try one more ritual. This time, in an abandoned house. I could not believe he was serious. "Are you for real?" I asked. He pleaded with me to give it one last try, promising it would be the ultimate experience. I asked if he had tried any on his own since then, and he admitted that nothing had worked. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping it would finally put an end to his obsession. On December 20th, Jack came over, and we rode our bicycles to an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of our village. It was a place people rarely spoke about, let alone visited. As we got closer, we ran into Jeff, a local man who had grown up near the area. He warned us about the house, telling us of the couple who had died there in the 1960s, and the strange sounds of banging closet doors that had driven another resident out years later. But we were young and full of adrenaline, so we pushed forward, ignoring his warnings. The house was everything you would expect from an abandoned place: dusty, broken windows, and eerie silence. Jack, as usual, took charge and told me we would be performing the midnight game. According to the legend, we would be hunted by a shadowy figure if we did not follow the ritual's rules carefully. The idea was terrifying, but Jack, sensing my hesitation, quickly offered an alternative. "There's an empty apartment in the city. It's been recently vacated and is still for sale. Let's do it there instead," he suggested. I agreed, thinking an apartment would feel less unsettling than this decrepit house. Later that night, we found ourselves standing in that empty apartment. It was cold, and the city's sounds felt distant, muted. We prepared the materials as instructed, writing our names on a piece of paper, pricking our fingers to drop blood on it, and lighting candles. The ritual commenced at exactly 2:34 a.m., according to the rules. We had to keep moving until 3:33 a.m. without letting our candles go out. As soon as the ritual began, a chill ran down my spine. The room seemed to darken even more, and I could feel my pulse quicken. Jack was sweating despite the cold. We decided to hide in the apartment's large closet, walking quietly in place as the ritual required. Minutes ticked by in silence. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from the other side of the apartment. Jack froze, his face pale. "Mark," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Something is crawling on my foot." His words sent a wave of dread through me. Before I could react, something in the darkness grabbed him. I heard him scream, his voice filled with terror, as he was dragged into the shadows. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I broke the apartment window and ran as fast as I could to the nearest police station. Breathless and shaking, I tried to explain what had happened. The police took my statement and sent a team to investigate. When they arrived at the apartment, they found no sign of Jack. The only things they noted were the overwhelming smell of something rotten and a strange, dark liquid dripping from the ceiling. The homeowner, who was supposed to move in the following week, had also gone missing. To this day, neither of them has been found. I have been haunted by that night ever since. Jack's disappearance left a hole in my life, one filled with nightmares and constant regret. I wish I had never agreed to those stupid rituals, never entertained the idea of dabbling in things he did not understand. Now all I have are questions that will never be answered and the chilling memory of my best friend's last words. I stood frozen as the woman continued her slow march towards the cemetery. The black filaments twitching from her body glistened in the faint light, reminding me of spider legs, but far more sinister. My gut twisted in knots as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted again, louder this time, hoping to break her trance. But she didn't respond. Her hollow eyes remained fixated on the cemetery gates ahead, as if drawn by some invisible force. My mind raced, replaying Philip's warnings about traps. But this didn't feel like any ambush I'd ever heard of. This woman wasn't human anymore, at least not fully. Against my better judgment, I took a cautious step closer. "Lady, stop, you're hurt," I called out, though I wasn't sure if he even felt pain. Suddenly, one of the long, spidery legs burst out from her back, straightened, and lashed in my direction. It missed me by inches, but I stumbled back in horror. My mind screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, watching in sheer disbelief. More of those insect-like appendages started emerging from her, waving erratically as if sensing the air around her. It was like her body was no longer under her control. A low, mechanical whir filled the air, a noise so foreign and unnatural that it made my skin crawl. I took another step back, finally listening to my survival instincts. I had seen enough. I spun around and sprinted back to my car, flinging myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the ignition. I didn't look back. The tires screeched as I floored the gas, speeding away from the horror I had just witnessed. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just seen, but there was no explanation that made sense. That woman, if she even was still a woman, was something else entirely. Something not of this world. As I sped down the dark road, Philip's words echoed in my head. "You need to get out of there immediately." I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called him back. "Philip," I gasped as soon as he answered. "There's something seriously wrong." She had things coming out of her, like spider legs. Philip swore on the other end. "I told you it was a trap. Get to my place, now. Whatever that thing is, you don't want to be around when it gets closer." I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman chasing after me, but the road behind was empty. My pulse was still racing as I took the next turn towards Philip's house. The night was growing darker by the second, the trees on either side of the road casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move in unnatural ways. "Are you still there?" Philip's voice brought me back to reality. "How far are you?" "Almost there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening, but something's wrong in Frost Hollow. That wasn't human, Philip. Whatever we're dealing with, it's not normal." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I've been doing some digging," Philip finally said. "There have been rumors for years about strange experiments and disappearances around here, especially after dark. Some people think it's connected to old government projects or something deeper stuff that goes beyond what we can comprehend. Whatever you saw, it could be one of those things they were experimenting on. I asked, incredulous. "What do you mean?" "I don't know all the details," he admitted, "but there are stories about people being taken, experimented on, and returned different. They come back wrong, like they're not fully human anymore. That's probably what you saw out there. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as his words sunk in. The thought of anyone being used for experiments, twisted into something unnatural, made my skin crawl. What do we do? I asked. How do we stop them? Philip sighed. I don't know if we can stop them, but we need to stay off their radar. I've got enough supplies to keep us safe for a while, but we need to keep a low profile and be ready to fight if we have to. I turned onto his street, spotting his house at the end of the block. The lights were off, and the windows were barricaded with wooden planks. He wasn't kidding about being prepared. As I pulled into the driveway, Philip was already standing at the door with a shotgun slung over his shoulder. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Come inside," he said, glancing nervously down the road. "We need to talk about what's coming next." I followed him into the house, locking the door behind me. We sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of what had just happened still heavy in the air. "Whatever's going on out there," Philip said, loading his shotgun. "It's only the beginning." I gripped the steering wheel tightly as the black truck moved past me, its dark windows concealing any hint of who or what was inside. My heart pounded louder with each second, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins. I kept my eyes forward, trying to remain calm, but the truck's ominous presence lingered in my mind. It wasn't just the truck. It was the strange creature in my trunk, the mutilated woman, and the eerie feeling that I was no longer in control of the situation. The truck disappeared into the distance, and I let out a shaky breath, hoping it was just an ordinary vehicle. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The entire night had been a surreal nightmare, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that whatever had happened tonight was beyond anything I could comprehend. I drove in silence, the sound of the tires rolling over the cracked pavement the only thing anchoring me to reality. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Should I go to the authorities? Could I even explain what had happened? No one would believe me. They'd think I was crazy. And what if they did believe me? What would they do with the creature in the trunk? My brother's words echoed in my head. "You need to get out of there immediately." As I approached the outskirts of town, the familiar streets of Frost Hollow came into view. The night was still, but it felt like I was being watched from every shadow, every corner. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that monstrous figure chasing me down the road. But all I saw was the empty street behind me. I needed help. I needed someone who could understand, or at least someone who wouldn't dismiss me as insane. I pulled out my phone and dialed Philip's number again. It rang twice before he picked up. "Did you make it out?" His voice was tight with worrying. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "But there's something you need to know. It wasn't just the men in black. There was something else. I don't even know how to describe it. It came out of that woman, like some kind of monster. I hid it with my car. It's in my trunk right now." There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean in your trunk?" "I don't know. It's like some spider jellyfish thing. Huge eyes, black legs, the whole works. I killed it. At least, I think I did." Philip swore under his breath. "Listen to me. You need to get rid of it. Nah, don't bring that thing anywhere near civilization. I've heard of stuff like this before. Whatever it is, it's not from this world. If anyone finds out you have it, you'll disappear just like the others." A chill ran down my spine. "Disappear? You think the government hasn't been keeping tabs on these things? They'll cover it up, erase any trace of what happened. Trust me. You don't want to be the guy holding the evidence when they come looking." I swallowed hard, glancing back at the trunk. The thought of opening it again, of looking at that grotesque creature one more time, made my stomach churn. What do I do? You get as far away from here as you can, find somewhere isolated, and burn it. Make sure there's nothing left. Not a shred of that thing can survive. Understand? The weight of his words sank in, and I realized I had no other choice. If what he was saying was true, I couldn't risk keeping the creature. I couldn't let anyone else get caught up in this nightmare. I'll take care of it, I muttered, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. Good, Philip said. Call me when it's done, and be careful. I have a feeling this isn't over. I hung up the phone and sat in the car for a long moment, staring blankly ahead. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and disbelief. How had my night gone so horribly wrong, and what was I supposed to do next? With a deep breath, I put the car in gear and drove out of town, heading toward the forest on the edge of Frost Hollow. The towering pines loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the night wind. It was the only place I could think of to dispose of the creature far enough from anyone to avoid suspicion. As I pulled off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path, I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me. The forest was eerily quiet, the moon casting long shadows across the ground. I parked the car in a small clearing and stepped out, the cool air hitting my face like a splash of cold water. I popped the trunk, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. The stench hit me first, a sickening mixture of ozone and rot. The creature was still there, its black legs curled up beneath it, its massive eyes staring blankly at nothing. It looked like something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the tarp and dragged the creature out of the trunk, its body making a wet, squelching sound as it hit the ground. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I forced it down. There was no time for weakness now. I doused the creature in gasoline, the pungent smell filling the air as I backed away, lighter in hand. The flame flickered in the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it onto the creature, and the flames roared to life, consuming the black mass in an instant. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching the fire burn. The creature's body crackled and popped, its once glistening skin turning to ash. The blue blood sizzled, sending up thick, acrid smoke that stung my eyes. When the flames finally died down, nothing remained but a charred black spot on the forest floor. I kicked dirt over the ashes, trying to erase any trace of what had happened. It was done. But as I drove away from the forest, the eerie feeling that something or someone was still watching me lingered in the back of my mind. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The kitchen window had shattered inward, fragments of glass glittering on the tile floor like broken stars. Philip aimed his rifle at the breach, his breathing heavy and erratic. My hands trembled as I gripped the shotgun tighter, sweat pouring down my forehead. The ominous air outside felt thick with danger, as though the shadows themselves were alive. A sudden movement in the backyard made us both freeze. One of the black-suited men stood there, his pale, smooth face peeking through the broken window. The painted lips twitched in a grotesque imitation of a smile, his unblinking, reptilian eyes locking onto us like a predator sizing up its prey. You've made this much harder than it needed to be, the man rasped, his voice no longer holding any pretense of civility. His long, bony fingers gripped the window frame as he slowly began to pull himself through, twisting his body with unnatural flexibility. Philip fired without hesitation. The rifle barked, the echo of the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The figure jerked violently, but to our horror he didn't fall. Instead, he straightened up, his face contorting into a sickening grin as he continued climbing inside, "Get back!" I screamed, raising the shotgun and firing a blast into the man's chest. The impact sent him stumbling backward, crashing through the remnants of the broken window, his body crumpling in a heap outside. But I knew it wasn't over. "They're not human," Philip muttered under his breath, eyes wide with terror. His knuckles whitened around the rifle as the reality of our situation sank in deeper. He stepped back cautiously, motioning for me to do the same. "We need to get out of here." Before we could move, the walls began to vibrate. A low humming filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. I felt it deep in my bones, a disorienting sensation that made it hard to think, let alone act. The air seemed to shimmer, as though reality itself was warping around us. "They're trying to mess with our minds," Philip said, clutching his head. His face contorted in pain, eyes flicking back and forth as if seeing things that weren't there. "Don't listen to it. Don't let it in." I struggled to stay focused, my vision swimming as the humming grew louder. The men in black were doing something unnatural, something beyond human understanding. I could feel their presence pressing down on my mind, trying to worm their way in, like parasites feeding on fear and confusion. But I couldn't let them win. I had to fight back. "We need to leave now," I said, grabbing Philip by the arm and pulling him toward the front door. He nodded weakly, still disoriented, but he followed. As we reached the door, I cast one last glance toward the kitchen, where the shattered window stood as a reminder of the danger we faced. The moment we stepped outside, the cold night air hit us like a slap to the face, clearing some of the fog clouding our minds. But it didn't take away the dread gnawing at my gut. I could feel them watching us. Even if I couldn't see them, they need to get rid of the body, Philip said, his voice strained. "That's what they're after. If they find it, we're screwed," I nodded, running toward the car. I opened the trunk and stared down at the tarprap corpse. The grotesque legs of the alien creature still poked out from under the fabric, slick with blue blood. I felt a wave of nausea, but there was no time to hesitate. "We'll drive out to the old quarry," I suggested. "Dump it there. No one will find it." Philip nodded, but before we could get in the car, a blinding light suddenly illuminated the street. I turned to see the massive black pickup truck from earlier, its headlights bearing down on us. "They're here," I whispered, my heart racing. The truck slowly rolled to a stop, and the driver's door opened. A figure emerged, and as it stepped into the light, I recognized the same pale, lipless face and lidless eyes from the men who had knocked on the door. Without thinking, I slammed the trunk shut and jumped into the driver's seat. Philip barely had time to climb in before I floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as we sped down the street. Dot in the rearview mirror, the truck followed us. Its headlights grew larger and larger, closing the distance quickly. I could hear Philip loading his rifle, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the ammo. "They won't stop," he said, his voice low and grim. "They won't stop until they get what they want." But I wasn't about to let them win. With every ounce of focus I had left, I sped through the twisting streets of the town, the black truck relentless in its pursuit. As we neared the outskirts, the old quarry loomed ahead like a gaping maw in the earth, a place forgotten by most, but remembered by those who needed to hide something. I took a sharp turn down the dirt path leading to it, my tires kicking up clouds of dust behind us. The truck followed, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. "We're running out of time," Philip said, his voice filled with dread. I knew he was right. We were nearing the edge of the quarry, and soon we would have no more road left. There was only one option left. "Get ready," I said, gripping the wheel tightly. With a final surge of determination, I veered off the path, aiming straight for the steep cliff of the quarries. Philip flung open the kitchen door, revealing rising currents of flame and choking black smoke. The window above the sink stood smashed. As I stared in horror, I saw another Molotov cocktail arc gracefully through the air. It came through the window, the top of its filthy, all-streaked rag sputtering with blue flames. The bomb hit the sink with a tinkling crash. There was a whoosh as the fire exploded across the far end of the room. "Run!" I screamed at Philip, grabbing his arm and jerking him backward. He continued to stare at the flames with a hypnotized, unbelieving expression, watching as his house and everything he owned disappeared before his eyes come out. I heard the leader shriek in an electronically amplified voice. It sounded like it came from the back of the house where the Molotov cocktails had come from. Philip and I ran side by side to the front door. "Shit, what's that?" Philip said, pointing outside. I saw an enormous black pickup truck parked outside, its engine still running, its lights turned on. Two massive men with long, black beards and dark, glittering eyes stared daggers at my sedan, which was parked in my brother's driveway. A sense of horror overtook me as I realized they were staring at the hood and shattered windshield, where the blood of the woman and the creature still glimmered darkly. The men looked like they could have been professional football players. They were stocky and tall, with thick layers of muscle covering their bodies. They were both dressed in full camo. The one in front had a black caterpillar hat covering his massive head, while the one in back let his long, greasy brown hair spill over his shoulders. Both carried large black pistols in their right hands. "Come out. I know you murdered my daughter." The man in the caterpillar hat screamed in a voice that quivered with insanity. "You ran her over not even half a mile from where I live. This is payback time, freak." He glanced at the other man and gave a barely perceptible nod. As one, they raised their pistols and started emptying the magazines, shooting at the windows and doors of the burning house. An insane, fanatical luster shone on their faces. The smoke had grown thick across the entire first floor by this point. I didn't know where the men in black were, but I was just as afraid of running into them as I was of the two crazed hunters outside. The pistol bullets pinged crazily through the house, hitting lights and erupting through the drywall. "We need to get out of here," I cried, grabbing Philip's shoulders and shaking him. He looked dissociated, shell-shocked. "We're going to burn alive or get shot. The basement," he cried. "We'll go out the basement door to the side of the house," I nodded, not giving us a moment to consider alternate possibilities. We both knew we had run out of time. We flew down the basement stairs. The power went out at that moment, plunging us into darkness except for the flickering light from the fire upstairs. Philip flicked a lighter with his left hand, holding it out in front of him to ward off the creeping shadows. The air was much cooler and easier to breathe than the basement, at least for the time being. Thin streams of black smoke had already started filling it, floating across the room like ghosts. Philip ran up the few concrete steps leading out. In front of us stood two metal doors angled at 45 degrees. Beyond that lay freedom or death. "Let's go," I hissed, being as quiet as possible. The crashing of burning cabinets and the hissing of the flames gave us some cover, but not much. Philip took a deep breath and then pushed the doors open. He looked out on the left side of the house, across the grassy lawn, and toward the dark evergreens surrounding Philip's property. "Nothing moved. It's our only chance. We need to get to the forest, and then we can find help," I whispered. He almost laughed at that. "Who would help us?" "The police, the government?" he asked contemplatively. I just shook my head, pushing myself up and out of the basement. It was not an issue worth thinking about yet. I stumbled forward across the lawn as a harsh shout rang out behind me. I turned, seeing the two hunters in their camo jackets running around the side of the house. Philip was only a few feet behind me, killed them. The man in the caterpillar hat roared, firing his pistol at us over and over. The bullets whizzed past my head with terrifying cracks and whines. I spun, aiming the shotgun and firing. I heard an agonized scream through the ringing in my ears, but I dared not stop long enough to look back. The cover of the trees stood only a stone's throw away. I ran for it, hearing a few more bullets explode all around me, sending splinters of wood flying in every direction. Once I had made it to the cover of the trees, I glanced back, seeing Philip bleeding on the lawn, a bubbling bullet hole in his neck. I cried out, nearly running back to my injured brother. Waves of regret and pain crashed over me. The man with the long hair also lay on the ground, half of his face ripped off and spurting. I could see the ragged, blood-stained skull grinning behind that patch of mutilation. The man in the caterpillar hat noticed, kneeling down and whispering something to his friend. The men in black appeared by the road, each holding a long silver gun attached to a square metal backpack. I quickly realized that these were flamethrowers. I had seen pictures of them before when they were used in Vietnam and World War II. These looked much more modern, but they were still the same in basic design. Philip's rifle lay by his side, his twitching fingers trying to reach for it. I raised the barrel of the shotgun, aiming for the man in the caterpillar hat. But the men in black beat me to it. The three of them stood side by side, their faces blank masks of nothingness. In unison, their metal flamethrowers ignited, throwing jets of concentrated flame 100 feet away like the attack of a fire-breathing dragon. The man in the caterpillar hat never knew what hit him. He had been focused on Philip when the flames seized him from behind. Philip saw it coming, though. With the last of his dying strength, he raised the rifle, pointing at the leader and firing. At the same moment, I opened fire, trying to stop these monstrous creatures. The leader fell as a bullet pierced his heart. White, shimmering blood leaked out, like the lubricating fluid of some strange, futuristic robot. It glimmered with rainbows like waste oil, twisting, morphing currents of color that danced and curved as more blood gushed out. He grabbed for his chest, falling forward silently in surprise. A rush of flame consumed Philip at that moment, covering his body like a blanket. By the time it receded, he had become little more than melted fat and ashes. In grief and loss, I kept firing until all the bullets in the shotgun were used up. I didn't realize, at first, that all three men in black lay dead on the lawn. The house fire had turned into an inferno by this point, rising up into the black sky. I stood alone at the edge of the forest, my brother dead. The evidence I had gathered would be nothing more than ashes as well by now. As usual, we would not be able to prove the horrors occurring here to the outside world. I felt certain this was not the first time evidence had been destroyed in this town. In the silhouette of the blazing fire, I saw hundreds of glossy, black creatures, each no bigger than a baseball. They looked like the hellish parasite that had erupted from the woman's body, but in miniature. They crept out of the broken windows and flaming doors on jointed, spidery legs. In chaotic, random packs, they skittered across the lawn, disappearing into the thick woodlands and swamps of Frost Hollow. The notification appeared on my phone out of nowhere. No download, no prompt, just a mysterious icon labeled Fate Finder. Curiosity stirred within me, mingling with a slight sense of unease. My fingers hovered above the screen as I tapped on the icon, half expecting my phone to freeze or glitch. Instead, the app launched smoothly with a simple yet chilling message displayed across the screen. Do you want to know if you will be murdered? I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. my rational mind screaming at me that this was absurd, some kind of prank or marketing ploy. Who would create an app like this, and why? Still, despite my better judgment, curiosity gnawed at me. What could the harm be in tapping yes? It was just an app, after all. I could delete it afterward and laugh it off. After a few moments of loading, the app displayed an even more unsettling message. Your friend Jerome will be your murderer. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the screen. Jerome, my best friend since college, the guy who had always been there for me, through breakups, promotions, bad days, and all the good ones. The mere thought of Jerome kind, dependable, loyal Jerome harming me in any way was preposterous, but something deep inside me shifted. A small, insidious seed of doubt had been planted, and once it was there, it was hard to ignore. I laughed at myself, shaking off the feeling. It was ridiculous. Jerome was like family to me. The app was a joke, probably just some random algorithm spitting out names to freak people out. And yet the words on the screen echoed in my mind long after I closed the app. But at first, I dismissed it all as nonsense. Jerome was my brother in all but blood. Why would he ever hurt me? But as the days passed, I found myself thinking about the prediction more often. Each time I saw Jerome, I could not help but scrutinize him, his mannerisms, his tone, the way he looked at me. The words from the app lingered in the back of my mind, nagging at me like an itch I could not scratch. Fate Finder, however, was relentless. The notifications continued popping up at the most inconvenient times during meetings at work, in the middle of the night, even while I was out with friends. Each time it was the same message. Your friend, Jerome, will be your murderer. No matter how many times I tried to delete the app, it always reappeared on my phone, like some digital curse I could not escape. After a week of enduring these unwanted notifications, I decided to confront Jerome. I knew how ridiculous I would sound, but the weight of uncertainty had become too much for me to bear. One evening, over drinks, I told him everything. His reaction was predictable. First disbelief, then laughter. Are you serious, man? Jerome said, chuckling and shaking his head. It is just an app. You really cannot be buying into this nonsense. I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But the seed of doubt had already taken root, and it grew with each passing day. Jerome was right. It was just an app. But what if it was not? What if there was some truth to it? I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination get the best of me, but the thought would not go away. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more I found myself watching Jerome closely. I scrutinized every gesture, every word, every expression. Was he acting differently around me? Was that look in his eyes the same as before, or was there something lurking beneath the surface, something darker that I had never noticed? It was irrational, I knew, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Weeks passed, and though I continued to see Jerome regularly, my unease grew. I no longer felt comfortable in his presence, though I could not put my finger on why. I wanted to tell him how I felt, but I could not risk ruining our friendship over something so absurd. So I kept it to myself, trying to act normal, while the storm raged inside me. One night, Jerome invited me over to his apartment for dinner. It was a regular occurrence for us, so I accepted without hesitation, despite the growing tension in my chest. We sat down at his dining table, eating homemade lasagna and chatting about work, life, and random things. Yet, through it all, I could not stop thinking about the prediction. It was like a shadow looming over me, tainting every moment of our evening together. After dinner, He moved to the living room, where Jerome suggested watching a horror movie. Normally, I would have been all for it, but that night I felt uneasy. Still, I agreed, hoping that the movie might distract me from the constant dread gnawing at my mind. We settled into the couch, the glow of the television flickering across the room. As the movie played, I could barely focus on the screen. Every noise, every shift in the room felt amplified, my nerves on edge. Jerome excused himself halfway through the film to get more popcorn from the kitchen, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. As I waited, the silence grew suffocating. My thoughts raced, the memory of Fate Finder's prediction taking hold of my mind like a vice. It was just an app, I reminded myself again and again. It did not mean anything, but as the minutes dragged on, Jerome did not return. The sounds of the movie blurred into the background as my anxiety spiked. Something felt off. I called out to him, but there was no answer. My heart pounded in my chest, the silence in the apartment growing heavier with each passing second, just as I was about to get up and check on him. A piercing scream shattered the stillness. I jumped from the couch, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound had come from the kitchen. Jerome, I called out, rushing toward the source of the scream. What I found made my blood run cold. Jerome was lying on the kitchen floor, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling around him. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. I rushed to his side, shaking him, trying to wake him up, but he was gone. The police arrived not long after. They questioned me, though I could hardly comprehend their words. They ruled it an accident to fall down the stairs that led to his untimely death. But as they led me out of the apartment, I could not stop thinking about the app. Was Fate Finder wrong? Had the app predicted my murder, when in fact Jerome had died instead? Days blurred into weeks as I struggled to cope with the loss. I buried myself in work, trying to push the memory of Jerome's lifeless body from my mind. But Fate Finder's message haunted me, a dark cloud that followed me everywhere I went. Even as I tried to move on, I could not escape the feeling that something was unfinished, that the app's prophecy was still playing out. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, another notification from Fate Finder appeared on my phone. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the app, expecting to see some new torment. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. You will be your own murderer. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, mocking me. What did it mean? How could I be my own murderer? I stared at the message, my mind reeling. Had the app been right all along? Not about Jerome, but about me. Was my fate somehow tied to this cursed app? Desperate for answers, I dove deeper into the app, scouring every menu and option for an explanation. But there was nothing, no instructions, no hints, just a cold, ominous message. I tried to delete the app again, but once more it reappeared. I was trapped in its web, and I had no idea how to escape. As I set my phone down, another notification popped up. Incoming video call. Say hi to Jerome. I cleared my throat, feeling the discomfort rise. Well, most of it. There was just one thing. This rule about not laughing after dark. Is that ... serious? Irene's laugh echoed through the phone, light and carefree, as though I had just cracked a joke. Oh, I suppose it might seem strange at first, but yes, it's very important. You see, it's for the safety of everyone in the community. We've all agreed, and we abide by it for a good reason. Safety. What kind of safety? I pressed, my curiosity piqued. There was a brief pause before she replied, her tone becoming slightly more measured. It's hard to explain over the phone. Owen, just trust me when I say it's not something you want to test. Follow the rule, and everything will be just fine. I didn't push further, sensing I wouldn't get a straight answer. After ending the call, I shared the strange conversation with Rowan over breakfast. Safety, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. How does laughter put anyone in danger? I shrug, still trying to make sense of it. I don't know, but they take it seriously. Let's just play along for now. For the next few days, life in Bravero seemed normal enough. The neighbors were friendly, their houses immaculate, and the neighborhood events lively. Yet, as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was an eerie quiet. No laughter, no shots, not even the faintest sound of amusement. It felt like the entire street held its breath each night. By the fifth evening, the novelty of the rule had worn off. We settled into our usual evening routine: dinner, a glass of wine, and a movie. The sun had just set, casting a pale glow across the sky, but we were inside, cozy in our new home. Are we really going to live like this? Rowan asked, her voice tinged with frustration, tiptoeing around some absurd rule. I glanced at the window, the last traces of daylight fading fast. It's just a little thing. We're almost used to it now, right? Rowan sighed, leaning back into the couch. Yeah, but it's still ridiculous. The scene on the TV was particularly funny. Some slapstick comedy had always got Rowan laughing. She stifled a giggle as a character slipped and fell dramatically, and I smiled, feeling the familiar tug of laughter in my own chest. But then, as if on instinct, we both fell silent, exchanging a nervous glance. The sun had fully set. I caught Rowan's worried expression as she glanced up from the mail she was sorting. What's wrong, Rowan? You look like you've seen a ghost. It's not a house, I said, struggling to steady my voice. It's the rule. Rowan raised an eyebrow, a hint of exasperation creeping into her voice. You're still on about that, she asked. And I know it sounds crazy, I admitted, wringing my hands. But I just spoke with Irene from the HOA. She was, I searched for the right words, disturbingly insistent about it. She made it clear that there are serious consequences for breaking this rule. Rowan's eyes narrowed. Consequences? What kind of consequences? That's just it, I said, shaking my head. She wouldn't say, only that it's something we wouldn't want to experience. And the way she spoke, it was like a threat. Not just about a fine or anything like that. It felt like something more sinister. Rowan stared at me, clearly struggling to digest the gravity of my words. Okay, let's assume for a moment that this is more than just some HOA nonsense. What are we supposed to do? Hide in the dark for the rest of our lives? No, that's not it, I said, trying to remain calm. We need to leave. I don't know what will happen if we don't follow the rule, but I don't want to find out. Rowan looked around the house, her gaze resting on the neatly arranged furniture and the boxes we had yet to unpack. We just moved in, Owen. We're supposed to start our new life here. I don't want to throw everything away because of a ridiculous rule. I know, I said, frustration edging my voice. But there's something wrong with this place, Rowan. Something we don't understand. I felt it from the moment we got here. I think we need to trust our instincts and get out before it's too late. Rowan sighed, rubbing her temples. All right, fine. But if we're going to do this, we need a plan. We can't just pack up and leave without figuring out where we're going or how we'll manage. I nodded, feeling a small measure of relief at her willingness to consider it. Let's start by finding a place to stay. We can look at hotels and maybe get a rental until we figure out our next steps. And in the meantime, we need to be cautious. No more laughing after dark. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rowan, and I packed what we could quickly, focusing on essentials and anything we couldn't bear to leave behind. We researched nearby hotels, finding one with available rooms and making a reservation for the night. As the sun began to set, we finished packing up the car. The once lively house now felt eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the sense of urgency pressing on me. With a final, anxious glance at the house, we drove away from Bravero. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, and as darkness began to fall, the oppressive silence of the neighborhood seemed to follow us, a chilling reminder of the rule we were leaving behind. We arrived at the hotel just before nightfall, our spirits heavy with the weight of our hasty departure. As we settled into our room, I felt a pang of regret mixed with relief. The hotel was a far cry from the dream home we had envisioned, but it was a safe distance from the strange and unsettling world of Bravero. The next morning, we would begin the process of selling the property and finding a new place. For now, all we could do was stay vigilant and hope that our decision to leave Bravero had spared us from whatever dangers lay hidden in the shadows of that community. And so, as we sat quietly in our hotel room, the rule of silence after dark still hung over us, a reminder of the strange and unsettling experience that had driven us away. Rowan's face paled as she read the note over my shoulder, her hands shaking. This can't be real," she whispered. "Who would send a note like this?" Joanne, still gasping and clutching her chest, managed to croak out between breaths. What is this?" "It's an expulsion notice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It says we need to exit through the basement." "Basement?" Rowan echoed, her voice barely audible. "We don't have a basement in this house." I nodded, a sinking feeling in my stomach. That's what I thought, too. But clearly the note means there's something else going on here. Maybe it's some sort of prank, Joanne wheezed, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "A very twisted prank." "I don't think so," I said, my voice grim. "This feels too calculated. And with what Irene said about the consequences, I doubt this is just a joke." I turned to Rowan, who was now helping Joanne to her feet, her hands trembling. "We need to figure out what's going on and get out of here before it's too late." "But how?" Rowan asked, her eyes wide with panic. "We don't even know where the basement is or if there even is one." "We'll have to search the house," I said firmly. "We have to find it before dark." The sky outside was now a deep and settling twilight. The fading light made every shadow seem menacing, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the rule bearing down on us. We had no time to waste. I guided Rowan and Joanne towards the basement door in the kitchen, which had remained untouched since our arrival. It was small and unassuming, nearly blending in with the wall. "I don't remember seeing this door before," Rowan said, her voice trembling. "It might be a recent addition," I suggested, "or it could have been hidden in some way." With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air that wafted up from the basement was cool and musty, carrying with it a faint smell of damp and mildew. "This doesn't look promising," Joanne said weakly, her voice still unsteady. "Stay close," I instructed, taking the lead. "We need to be careful." We descended the stairs slowly, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The basement was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. As we reached the bottom, I scanned the room for any sign of danger or clues about what awaited us. The basement was empty except for some old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. However, against one wall, there was a metal door partially obscured by a stack of old boxes. "That must be it," I said, pointing to the door. "Let's see if it leads anywhere." I approached the door and found that it was locked. I tried the handle, but it didn't budge. Frustrated, I looked around for something to use to force it open. "Do you have any idea what's behind that door?" Rowan asked, her voice filled with dread. "No," I admitted, "but it's our only lead right now. We have to find out." Joanne, still recovering from her choking incident, stood back, her eyes darting nervously around the basement. I found a crowbar among the old tools and managed to pry the door open. It creaked ominously, revealing a small room beyond. Inside, we found a series of documents and old photographs scattered across a dusty table. The photographs were of previous residents of Bravero, each looking eerily calm and intent. But the documents were the most unsettling. They were filled with warnings about breaking the rules of the community, with ominous phrases and disturbing illustrations depicting various consequences. "This is insane," Rowan said, her voice shaking. "It's like a cult, it's worse," I said, picking up one of the documents. "This isn't just about rules. It's about control. They manipulate and intimidate people to keep them compliant." As we examined the room, we found another note tucked beneath the table. It read, "Congratulations, you have discovered our warning system. We hope you are now aware of the importance of following our guidelines. Should you wish to leave Bravero, you must adhere to our rules. Failure to do so will result in more severe consequences. We trust you will make the right decision." My blood ran cold. The implications of the note were clear. The community was not just a place with strange rules. It was a place that exerted a terrifying level of control over its residents. "We need to get out of here," I said urgently. Now Rowan nodded in agreement, her face pale. Joanne, still recovering from her ordeal, followed us as we made our way back up the stairs. As we emerged from the basement, the sun had completely set. The darkness outside was now thick and oppressive, and I could feel the weight of the rule bearing down on us. We hurriedly gathered our things and prepared to leave the house for good. The once promising home had turned into a nightmare. As we drove away from Bravero, I looked back at the fading silhouette of the neighborhood. I hoped that by leaving, we had escaped whatever horrors the community harbored. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was away from the shadows of Bravero, where laughter was a forbidden sound, and the price for breaking the rules was far more than we could ever have imagined. The note had instructed us to please exit through the basement, but when faced with our options, we didn't act on it immediately. Joanne's scream shattered the silence as she flung open the front door, only to find not the porch, but the kitchen. The back door led to the front entryway, and every window overlooked different rooms of the house. We were trapped in a looping nightmare, far removed from reality. Our predicament was becoming unmistakably horrifying. "What happens if we follow the instructions?" Rowan whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. Joanne, still in shock, wailed, "What's happening?" "It's because of the laughter," I said, my voice trembling. "Joanne, you laughed." "What? How did that paper end up in my throat?" Joanne cried, her face streaked with tears and snot. "I don't understand." Rowan turned to me with a look of fear. "We need to try the basement. It's our only option." I nodded, my own fear mingling with resignation. We all knew that staying in the house was no longer an option. Joanne, still sobbing, followed us as we headed for the basement door. Opening it revealed a dark staircase. There was no relief. Instead, a more profound dread gripped me. The fear of what lay ahead was almost unbearable, as if death might be a preferable end to the horrors that awaited us. We descended into the basement, feeling our way down the steps. Once we reached the bottom, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. I reached for the light switch, but it was missing. The basement was an empty void, devoid of the familiar clutter we'd expected. "What now?" Joanne asked timidly. "This is the exit," I whispered, though my voice was laced with uncertainty. "No," Joanne replied, her fear growing palpable. "This can't be right." Rowan nodded in agreement. "There must be something more." Suddenly, Joanne's voice became distant, her presence fading into the dark. We called out for her, but the only response was an eerie, soul-draining laughter. It seemed to mock us, echoing from an unseen source. Joanne's panicked cries grew more frantic as she wandered further into the darkness. Her screams, filled with horror and confusion. "Stop laughing," Joanne cried out, her voice growing faint. "Who's there? Show yourself." The laughter grew louder, and I realized Joanne was moving toward something beyond our comprehension. Rowan and I struggled to locate her, our efforts in vain, as the void around us seemed to swallow our attempts. Suddenly, there was a distinct, unnerving sound, a scraping noise, as if something was moving. I turned my head to see the staircase had become an enormous distance away. The basement had transformed into an endless expanse of darkness. We were trapped with only the light from the top of the stairs marking our path. "Run," I shouted, pulling Rowan towards the stairs. "We need to help Joanne." Rowan pleaded, her eyes filled with tears. "There is nothing we can do," I said, my voice cracking. "Whatever that thing is, it's beyond us. We have to get out of here." As we reached the stairs, the darkness seemed to press against us. I felt a cold, skeletal hand brush my arm, a hand with 6 fingers, cloaked in ragged, decaying skin. It was not Joanne's hand. It was something far more sinister, a manifestation of the terror that controlled Bravero. I recoiled in horror, narrowly avoiding the grasp of the hand as it reached for us. I couldn't allow myself to be dragged into the abyss with Joanne. Instead, I pulled Rowan up the stairs, slamming the door behind us. We ran through the front entrance and burst onto the porch. The sight of the driveway was a momentary comfort as we rushed to our car, starting it with shaking hands and driving away from Bravero as fast as we could. We left everything behind, our belongings, our home, and any semblance of normalcy. We didn't look back. The horrors we'd witnessed were far worse than any material loss. There are fates more terrifying than death, and I hope that Joanne never truly saw what lay in that basement. I pray that she was spared the full horror of Bravero's dark secret. Every horror story starts with a chilling line, one that sends shivers down your spine. But this isn't one of those. It's not terrifying in the traditional sense. Instead, it's something far worse. It's despair, the kind of dread that comes from knowing this is reality. The nightmare I'm trapped in. May 15th was supposed to be one of the biggest nights of high school. Prom overhyped in every movie and gossiping corner of the school. Everyone talked about it like it was the event that would define their teenage years. For me, it was the opposite. No date, a last-minute dress, and the role of a third wheel to my best friend and her boyfriend. I should have stayed home. Tonight will be fun, I promise. I'll even dance with you instead of him, my best friend joked, cupping my cheek playfully, her usual teasing grin plastered on her face. Her boyfriend, as always, ignored our flirtatious antics and focused on driving. When we arrived, everything seemed off right from the start. While they went off to eat dinner, I found myself alone at a table, staring at my phone, texting my parents to pick me up in an hour. It was a mistake to come. I knew that now. Maybe some TV at home would salvage what was left of the night. As I mindlessly scrolled through my phone, something caught my eye. A girl's heel. Dot was melting. Not in the way wax does, but her foot seemed to cave in, like cheese bubbling and pulling apart. I blinked, and it was gone. Anxiety, I thought to myself. It's just nerves. Prom is getting to me. I shrug it off and join the dance floor for a few of the usual cheesy numbers. The Cupid shuffle played, and we all move together in unison, step right, step left, until I noticed something again. People melting. This time I could see it clearly. Their arms fused as they shuffled past each other, melting like goo as they brushed shoulders. But no one else noticed. No one even flinched. They just kept dancing, moving, merging into one another. I turned in horror. My best friend and her boyfriend were part of it too. Their bodies had fused together, arms intertwined, their legs bound like a single warped mannequin. They smiled blankly, lost in the rhythm of the song. I tried to call out to her, but she didn't respond. No one did. Dot as I backed away. The room transformed before my eyes. People, students, teachers were becoming one, their bodies morphing together in ways that defied all logic. Some had two heads, while others had multiple arms, fingers jutting out from where they shouldn't be, faces contorted, eyes doubled or tripled, and lips overlapped in grotesque formations. All while continuing to dance to the damn Cupid shuffle. Dot, it was like a sick, fleshy monster, absorbing everyone in its path. No one screamed. No one stopped. They just kept smiling. The worst part, I was still untouched. Somehow I remained separate, an outsider, in this macabre scene. I bolted toward the exit, but it was blocked. Teachers, now part of this horrifying mass, barred the way. The entity grew larger, its leathery, sweaty flesh twisting and expanding as more people joined it. The lights flickered, and in the shadows, I could make out the distorted faces of my classmates, grinning but speaking in voices that oozed with pain. "What are you?" I yelled, my voice trembling as I pressed myself against the wall. 20 eyeballs turned to look at me, and then the voices, all of them, male, female, young, old, spoke as one. The sound was a chorus of agony. They didn't stop moving, their flesh still writhing, as if they were trying to reach me. I've hidden under a table, typing this. The mass is still moving, growing, coming closer. I don't know what will happen next. Will it consume me, make me one with it? Will it speak? Will I become part of that endless grin? I'm too scared to look. I do not know how much time I have left. It may not be much, so I'm typing this out while I still can. It all started a couple of nights ago, when I first fell asleep. What happened wasn't just strange, it was terrifying because I remembered it. I never remember my dreams, but this one, it was burned into my mind. The first night I dreamed I woke up in my bedroom. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life. The posters on the wall, the clothes scattered on the floor, even the TV remote was where I had left it the night before. It was too real. I could hear the soft hum of my fan. But then I heard a knock on my back door. It wasn't frantic, just a steady knock. I went downstairs and peered outside. No one was there, just the wind rustling through the trees. When I woke up the next morning, I brushed it off as a weird dream. No big deal, right? I went about my day as usual, waiting for the night to roll around so I could get some sleep. That night, the dream came back. This time, everything was the same, but with a slight difference. I noticed the remote wasn't where I had left it in real life. It was in the spot I left it in the dream from the night before. Weird, but not terrifying. Like the night before, I heard the knock on the door again. This time, though, I looked closer outside, and that's when I saw him. A man absolutely drenched in blood was standing behind a tree staring right at me. He wasn't moving, just watching me with this eerie, wide smile. His eyes were locked onto mine, and that grin ... It was unnatural. I jolted awake, my heart racing. The strange part, I woke up at the exact time I needed to without an alarm. I hadn't set one, but somehow I woke up right on time. As always, I turned on the news while I ate breakfast. That's when I saw the police sketch of a man who was wanted for a string of murders in the area, 15 victims, all found mutilated. My heart sank when I saw the sketch. It was him, the man from my dream. The blood-stained grin, the hollow eyes, it was him. But I told myself it was just a coincidence. It had to be. I went to work, trying to shake the feeling. That's when someone asked me if I'd seen the news. Apparently, another person was found dead in the nearby lake. The disturbing part, they had reported having dreams about the man before their death. My stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't shake the unease. On my way home, every shadow seemed to move. Every passerby seemed suspicious. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I even stopped by my neighbor's house to ask if they'd been having any strange dreams lately. I was desperate to know if I was losing my mind. When I got there, I was met with flashing lights, police cars, an ambulance. My neighbor was dead. The scene was horrific, blood everywhere, smeared across the walls in giant letters that spelled out, "Sleep well." I tried telling one of the officers about my dream, about the man. He brushed me off, told me it was impossible for dreams to connect to real-life events. He said unless I had any real evidence, I should go home, that I'd be fine. But I wasn't fine. When I got home, every door was locked, every window sealed. But I knew something was wrong. Still, like an idiot, I went to sleep. That night the dream returned, but this time I ran. As soon as I saw him outside, I bolted upstairs. Everything was a blur. I vaguely remember writing something on my computer, panicking. As I heard him breaking into the house, he was coming for me. I could hear him getting closer, and then just as he was about to reach me, I woke up. It was only 2:09 a.m. I had been asleep for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, still shaking from the nightmare. But when I looked outside, he was there, standing under the street light, staring at me, his face drenched in blood, his eyes gleaming with that sick smile. This wasn't a dream. This was real. I ran upstairs, hid behind my bed, and that's where I am now. He's breaking down the door. I can hear the wood splintering, the doorknob rattling. I don't know how much time I have left. I'm typing this out, hoping someone reads it. If you ever see this man in your dreams, don't ignore it. Seek help. Do whatever you can, because once he finds you, there's no escaping him. He's almost inside. Please, if I don't make it, just remember, you might be next. I grew up in a quaint little town where life was slow and predictable. The biggest event of the year was always the summer fair, a time when everyone came together and celebrated the simplicity of small-town life. It was the kind of place where nothing really changed. But everything changed the night the flicker came. It began as nothing more than a whispered legend. The older folks would talk about it quietly, warning the younger ones to be inside before dark. The flicker, they said, was a mysterious, spectral figure, a flash of light you could barely glimpse out of the corner of your eye. No one took it seriously. It was just another story, a way to keep kids from running around the streets late at night. At least, that's what we all thought, until people started disappearing. I was 17 the first time I saw it. I was walking home late from my friend Alex's house, taking the familiar route through the quiet, empty streets. The night was cool, and the street lights threw long shadows on the pavement. Everything was still, apart from the steady hum of cicadas. Then, out of nowhere, I caught a flash of light from the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty street and the darkness beyond. I shook it off, chalking it up to tired eyes, and made my way home. The next morning, Alex wasn't at school. I didn't think much of it until I stopped by his house later that day. His mother answered the door, her face pale and streaked with tears. Alex had disappeared during the night. There was no sign of a struggle, no note, no explanation. He was just gone. Word of Alex's disappearance spread fast, and soon the entire town was buzzing with rumors, but no one could explain it. A few more days passed, and another person vanished, then another. Each time it was someone who had seen the flicker before they disappeared. The town was gripped with fear, and curfews became stricter, but it didn't stop the vanishings. Every night, someone would claim to have seen that eerie flash of light. It wasn't long before I started to believe the old stories weren't just tales after all. A few weeks after Alex disappeared, I was in my room trying to study, but my mind kept drifting back to the disappearances. The lights in my room began to flicker. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the bulb, praying it was just a power surge. But then the lights went out completely. In the pitch-black room, I saw it again, a bright flash out of the corner of my eye. Slowly, I turned toward the source of the light, dread crawling up my spine. In the corner of my room stood a figure, barely visible against the darkness. Its form flickered and shifted as if it were made of shadows, and at times its eyes were blindingly bright. I was paralyzed with fear, my body refusing to move as the figure spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere, nowhere, all at once. "You must leave," it whispered. "This town is mine." The lights came back on, and just like that, the figure was gone. But the terror lingered. I didn't waste any time. That very night, I packed a bag, left a note for my parents, and took the first bus out of town. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. For years, I kept moving, hopping from one place to another, never staying too long in any one spot. But the flicker followed me. No matter how far I ran, I would catch that same flash of light, always in the corner of my vision, always just out of reach. I tried telling people what I had seen, but no one believed me. They thought I was crazy, haunted by a figment of my imagination. One night I was holed up in a dingy motel room, my nerves on edge. The lights began to flicker again. I knew what was coming. I had been running for so long, but the flicker had finally caught up to me. The room plunged into darkness, and I saw it, the figure with those burning, coal-like eyes. It stood at the foot of my bed, watching me. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice soft and cold. "Your fate is sealed this time." I didn't run. I had nowhere left to go. My voice trembled as I spoke. "What do you want from me?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. The figure moved closer, its flickering form shifting like smoke. "Your fear," it said, "your despair." That's when I understood. The flicker wasn't just a ghost or a specter. It fed on fear. It thrived on the terror it created in its victims. It was a parasite, drawing strength from the very thing that kept me running. I took a deep breath, my heart still pounding in my chest, and forced myself to stand. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't control me." For a moment, the figure wavered, its bright eyes narrowing as if it were uncertain. Then, with a final blinding flash, it disappeared. The lights flickered back on, and I was alone. The flicker was gone, but I knew it would never truly be gone. It would always be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person to succumb to its terror. But I had faced my fear, and in doing so I had weakened its hold on me. Eventually I returned to my hometown. The disappearances had stopped, and life had returned to normal. I shared my story, warning others about the flickers. Slowly the town began to heal. The legend lost its power as people faced their fears, refusing to let it control them. Years later, as I walked down the peaceful streets, I caught a brief flash of light out of the corner of my eye. I turned, but there was nothing there, just an empty street, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The flicker would always be a part of our history, a reminder of the darkness within us all. But as long as we faced our fears, it would never hold power over us again. Isn't the only one making these noises. For the past couple of days, I've heard creaks and groans from the house late at night, like someone is walking around, but I can never pinpoint the exact source. The strangest part is that these sounds don't seem to come from the ground level. They're higher, almost like they're coming from above the ceiling. Maybe it's just an old house settling, but it feels too deliberate. I've walked around the house multiple times, trying to figure it out, but it's hard to investigate when I can't see anything. January 16th, 2018. I didn't sleep much last night. The scraping noise above me was constant, louder than it's ever been. I almost called Tyler, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I'm not imagining this. The noises are real, and they've been getting worse. At one point I could have sworn I heard something like a faint voice muffled far away, but definitely a voice. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but I'm not losing my mind. I decided to confront Natalia about everything today, but she didn't pick up when I called. Her voicemail was full. I'm not sure what to do. And without Scooter, I feel even more alone. I want to leave, but I can't abandon the dog. January 17th, 2018. I heard footsteps last night above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They seemed to be pacing back and forth. I was so scared I couldn't move. It felt like they were right above my bed. I lay there, holding my breath, praying for it to stop. But it didn't. The pacing continued for what felt like hours. In the morning, I checked the ceiling with my hands, trying to feel for any sign of where the noise might have come from. The ceiling was solid, no cracks or holes. But I swear there's something up there. I've been trying to keep calm, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've decided to call my dad tomorrow and tell him I want to come home. I don't care about the job anymore. Something is wrong here. January 18th, 2018. I heard the voice again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like a man, whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. I tried to track it, following the sound to the living room, but it faded away before I could get close. When I got back to my room, I heard the pacing again. The steps were slow, almost measured, like whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know they were there. I've decided to leave tomorrow. I don't care if Natalia is upset. I can't stay here another night. January 19th, 2018. This will be my last entry. I'm leaving in the morning, but before I go, I need to check the attic. There has to be an attic, I'm sure of it now. The sounds I've been hearing, the pacing, the voices that are coming from up there. I don't know what I'll find, but I have to know. I need to know if I'm just imagining things, or if there's really something or someone up there. I found a hatch in the hallway, near the bathroom. I'm going up there now, if I don't come back. Whoever finds this, please tell my dad I love him. That was the last entry on the thumb drive.